The most amazing story ever told doesn't start with once upon a time, but with in the beginning. From emptiness to life, from confusion to design, we begin a journey that influenced whole societies and still shapes our world today. The Old Testament isn't only a religious book, it tells the powerful story of people searching for purpose. It introduces us to surprising heroes, dangerous enemies, and moments when the divine stepped into human history. Why did a father almost give up his only son? How did a young shepherd confront the mightiest nation on earth? What caused a wealthy kingdom to fall apart in only 3 generations? From the dawn of time to a people forced from their land, we'll see how small actions led to huge outcomes, how unbelievable promises came true in strange ways, and how an imperfect nation carried a message of hope for all. Get ready for a story where a garden hints at lost harmony, floods bring fresh starts, towers show why we speak different languages, and a tiny group in the Middle East becomes the center of a story that still challenges what we believe about our future. This is the remarkable tale of the Old Testament, a place where the impossible meets the everyday, where the divine connects with humanity, and where ancient events help explain the present. Our adventure begins at the very first moment of time, when existence itself began. The book of Genesis opens with these words: "At the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth." Before this moment, only God existed, eternal, without a starting point or an ending. With intent and power, He created everything around us. The Bible explains that the earth, at first, had no shape and was empty, with darkness stretching over the deep, while God's Spirit moved above the waters. Into this stillness God spoke, "Let there be light." According to Genesis, God said, "Let there be light," and light appeared. He saw it was good and separated it from the darkness. This first act set a pattern. God speaks, creation responds, and He declares it good. On the second day, He divided the waters, placing a space between them we now call the sky, the air around our world. On the third day, 2 things happened. First, God gathered the waters under the sky so dry land would emerge. Then, He told the earth to grow plants. From the start, life was made to continue through reproduction, with each plant holding the ability to produce its own kind. On the 4th day, God formed the sun, moon, and stars to give light and help measure time and seasons. On day 5, He filled the seas and skies with living beings, giving them the blessing to grow in number. Day 6 began with animals living on the land and reached its highest point with the creation of human beings. On the 7th day, God stopped His work, not because He was tired, but to set a pattern for His creation. This pause became the origin of the Sabbath, a special day for rest and connection with the divine. The making of people is described with special attention. Unlike anything else created before, human beings were made to reflect God's very nature. Genesis 1:26-27 explains it this way: God said, "Let's make humans in our own image, to be like us. They will rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the livestock, all the land and every creature that moves on the ground." So God made humans to reflect Himself. Both male and female were created in His likeness. 2 important truths are revealed here. First, the phrase "let's make" suggests thoughtful planning within God's own being. Second, it clearly states that both men and women equally carry the divine image. Because of this, every person has built-in worth and dignity, as well as special abilities. Genesis 2 adds more details. It says the Lord God shaped the first man from the dust of the ground and then breathed life into his nostrils, causing the man to become a living soul. This moment paints the picture of a creator personally shaping his masterpiece. unlike earlier acts of creation, which happened through speech, giving life to the man involved direct action, God's breath bringing life. Once the man existed, God created a special place for him. Genesis 2:8-9 tells us that God planted a garden in the eastern region of Eden and placed the man there. This garden was full of beauty, resources, and everything needed for life. In this space, the man received his first purpose. God placed him in the garden to care for it and tend it. Work was not a punishment, but part of the original plan. Humans were meant to engage in meaningful activity and take care of the world around them. Along with this honor came one important rule. Do not eat from the tree that gives knowledge of good and evil. This one command, in a world full of freedom, gave humans the ability to make moral choices, a key part of their experience. Still, something wasn't quite complete. Genesis 2:18 explains that God said, "It's not good for man to be alone." So God decided to make someone who would be the right partner. After letting the man name all the animals, none were a true match for him. That's when God stepped in. He caused the man to fall into a deep sleep, took one of his ribs, and closed up the place. Then God made a woman from that rib and brought her to the man. His reaction showed how deeply connected he felt to her. He said, "Now this is someone truly like me, bone from my bones and flesh from my flesh." He called her woman because she came from man. This moment, captured in poetic words, shows the deep connection and harmony between man and woman. But what was life really like in this perfect garden before anything went wrong? The Bible offers glimpses of a world filled with peace, between people and God, between the man and the woman, and between humans and nature. Their relationship with God was close and personal. Genesis 3:8 mentions God walking in the garden during the cool part of the day, suggesting that his presence was regular and real. There were no walls or distance between them and the divine. Communication between the man and woman was open and effortless. There were no secrets between them, no emotional barriers, and no need to pretend. As Genesis 2:25 puts it, they were naked and felt no shame, showing a bond free from pretense or fear of judgment. Their connection to the world around them was one of care and responsibility, not domination or conflict. Tending the garden wasn't exhausting or discouraging. It brought satisfaction and yielded good results. The land responded kindly to their guidance and attention. Death hadn't yet become part of the human experience. Life overflowed with provision, not lack. There was no struggle over food or fear of what the future might bring. The garden gave them all they needed to live well and content. Yet their lives had meaning. They were given tasks, roles, and moral decisions to make. At the garden's center stood the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a boundary that reminded them that although made in God's image, they were not divine. The tree of life, also present, indicated that unending life was within reach. Death existed as a possibility, but it wasn't the certainty it would later become. In this ideal setting, the first man and woman lived in shalom, a deep peace that included every part of life: body, mind, relationships, and spirit. This was how God intended human life to be. But this harmony in Eden was not to last. In Genesis 3, a new figure appears. The snake was more clever than any wild creature God had made. It said to the woman, "Did God really say you can't eat from any tree here?" The deceiver's tactic was to twist God's words, making his wide permission seem like a strict ban. This shift in wording was meant to stir doubt about God's intentions. The woman tries to set the record straight, but she already reflects the serpent's influence by adding to what God said and softening the warning. Then the serpent directly challenges God's statement. "You won't die. God knows that once you eat it, you'll see clearly and be like him, knowing good and evil." This accusation paints God as someone keeping something valuable from them out of selfishness. The next part shows how the temptation worked inside the woman. She saw the tree's fruit looked tasty, was beautiful and promised wisdom, so she took it and ate. She also shared it with her husband, who was there with her, and he ate as well. The fruit's attraction had three sides. It appealed to the body, the eyes, and the mind. But choosing to eat it meant far more than just breaking a rule. This act wasn't just disobedience, it was a choice to break free spiritually, to reject God's rule, and to decide right and wrong for themselves. An important point is that Adam was there during the serpent's talk with the woman, but stayed silent. He did not protect or guide, and then he willingly joined in the act. Their fall came instantly. After eating the fruit, both of them became aware. They saw they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together to make clothes. What they discovered didn't bring freedom or deeper truth, but rather a sense of being exposed and ashamed. Their first move, covering themselves, stands for all later efforts by people to hide their faults and appear strong while feeling broken inside. The impact of their choice was immediate and far-reaching. In Genesis 3:8, the first spiritual result appears. The man and woman heard the Lord God walking in the garden during the evening breeze, and they hid among the trees. A relationship once marked by closeness was now filled with fear and distance. God called out, "Where are you?" This wasn't about location, it was a call to honesty and self-reflection. But instead of admitting their actions, they avoided responsibility and blamed others. Adam shifted the blame to both the woman and God. "The woman you gave me, she gave me the fruit, and I ate it." The woman pointed to the snake. "The serpent tricked me, so I ate." God then gave each of them a specific judgment, starting with the serpent. "I will make you and the woman enemies, and your descendants will oppose each other. Her offspring will crush your head, and you will strike his heel." This first promise of rescue shows that evil would be defeated, though it would harm the one bringing victory. The woman's punishment involved pain during childbirth and struggle in her relationship with her husband. The man's judgment was the longest. His work would now be hard, the land would fight against him, and he would eventually die. Still, God's compassion showed through, even during this punishment. He made them clothes from animal skins, covering their shame, suggesting the first animal death to cover human failure. Finally, they were sent out of Eden, not only as a penalty, but also as protection. Stopping them from reaching the tree of life kept them from living forever in a broken state. Now guarded by heavenly beings, the garden became a powerful memory of what was lost and the hope for something better, possible only through God's help. Outside Eden, the human story began. Genesis 4:1-2 says, "The man had relations with his wife Eve, and she became pregnant and gave birth to Cain. She said, 'With the Lord's help, I have created a man.' Later, she gave birth to Abel, his brother. Abel raised sheep while Cain worked the land." These two brothers reflect two basic types of human livelihood, both different but equally valid. The story quickly moves to their offerings. After some time, Cain gave the Lord a gift from his crops, and Abel offered the best parts from the firstborn of his flock. The Lord accepted Abel's gift, but not Cain's. The passage doesn't say exactly why God favored one and not the other. It may have been the quality of the gift, the heart behind it, or the type of offering itself. Whatever the cause, God's response revealed deeper problems in Cain's inner life. Cain's reaction shows us his attitude. He became furious, and his expression turned dark. God came to him with guidance and a warning, teaching key truths about how sin waits close by, behaves almost like a living force, and how humans are responsible for holding it back. Sadly, Cain ignored the warning. He said to Abel, "Let's go into the field." While they were there, Cain attacked his brother and killed him. This marked the first death in human history, and it was murder, not a natural end. One brother took the life of another. God responded without delay. "Where is your brother Abel?" Like with Adam, God started with a question he already knew the answer to, and again, he was met with denial. I don't know. Am I supposed to watch over my brother? God's reply came with a striking image. Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. The earth, already damaged by sin, now turns even more against Cain. The soil he spilled blood on would now resist his work, offering nothing in return. Surprisingly, even after this, God gave Cain some protection. He marked Cain so that no one who saw him would harm him. This act shows that God's justice includes mercy, even towards someone who shows no remorse. Even when judging, God still restrains violence and preserves life. After being sentenced, Cain left God's presence and went to live in the land of Nod. The name Nod means wandering, showing his new identity as one without a home. Though the land was cursed, Cain still found a way to build a life. He married and had children. Genesis 4:17 says, Cain had relations with his wife, and she gave birth to Enoch. When he built a city, he named it after his son, Enoch. This first mention of a city in the Bible marks the beginning of organized human life. For Cain, a man sentenced to wander, the city offered the safety, order, and connection he longed for. Cain's descendants became pioneers in early inventions and culture. Genesis 4:20-22 tells us that Ada gave birth to Jabal, the ancestor of those who lived in tents and raised animals. Jabal's brother was named Jubal, the originator of string and wind music. Zillah, another wife, had a son named Tubal-Cain. He created tools from bronze and iron. These three show how Cain's line developed herding through Jabal, music through Jubal, and metalwork through Tubal-Cain. Although they were separated from God, Cain's family still reflected his image by showing creativity and skill. But while culture advanced, morality declined. Lamech, Cain's descendant 5 generations later, was the first to take multiple wives. More troubling is his violent song in Genesis 4:23-24. I have killed a man for hurting me, a young man for bruising me. He continues, if Cain is avenged 7 times, then I 77 times. These words reveal a dangerous mindset, revenge far beyond justice and pride in brutal power. What began with Cain as a single tragic act became, through Lamech, a lifestyle of violence. Lamech turned God's mercy on Cain into a reason to glorify harm. In contrast to this violent line, a different family story begins. Adam again lay with his wife, and she gave birth to a son named Seth, saying, God has given me another child in place of Abel, whom Cain killed. Genesis 4:25. Seth's name means appointed or replacement, making him Abel's spiritual heir. The story then highlights a turning point in Genesis 4:26. Seth's son Enosh was born, and people began to worship the Lord by name. While Cain's family focused on inventions, music, and building cities, Seth's descendants began formal devotion to God. This created a spiritual contrast between the two family lines, a pattern that would continue in human history. Genesis 5 presents a remarkable family tree from Adam to Noah, known for listing very long lives. Among them is Methuselah, who lived 969 years, the longest lifespan recorded in Scripture. These great ages might reflect the early world's unique conditions, a closeness to the original state of creation, or a divine reason related to the start of human society. Whatever the cause may be, these lengthy lifespans allowed people to gather a vast amount of wisdom and knowledge over time, and generations often lived together. In Genesis 5, the repeated line, lived years and died, serves as a steady reminder that death, brought in by the fall, still ruled. Even with hundreds of years to live, mortality was inescapable. Every man in the list, no matter how many years he walked the earth, eventually returned to dust. But one name breaks this pattern. Genesis 5:21-24 tells us, Enoch lived 65 years and had a son named Methuselah. After becoming a father, Enoch lived another 300 years walking closely with God, and then he disappeared because God took him. Enoch never experienced death like the others. He was brought straight into God's presence. What made him different was how he lived, with God in step with him, just as Noah would be later described. This close relationship, this shared purpose, made Enoch a rare light in a darkening time. His sudden removal must have deeply affected those around him, showing that knowing God can even reach beyond death itself. Another figure worth noting is Methuselah, Enoch's son. His name might mean, "When he dies, it will happen," possibly pointing to the flood that came the same year he passed away. Living 969 years, his long life reflects God's patience, delaying judgment to give more time for people to turn back. This family line also connects Noah directly to Seth, the faithful branch, in contrast with the increasingly violent and worldly line of Cain. So by the time Noah appears in Genesis 6, his background already shows him as someone shaped by a heritage of closeness with God. As more people filled the earth, evil also multiplied rapidly. Genesis 6:1-2 introduces one of the Bible's most puzzling events. When people began to increase in number and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw how beautiful they were and chose wives from among them. There's been long debate about who these sons of God were. The main theories include fallen angels who took on human form, powerful kings who took many wives, or Seth's descendants marrying women from Cain's line, blending faithful and unfaithful families. No matter the view, the outcome was disastrous. Genesis 6:5 says, "The Lord saw that human evil had spread everywhere, and every thought in people's hearts was only evil all the time." This speaks not only of actions, but of a deep-rooted sickness in human nature, where even their inner thoughts and desires were twisted and constantly bent toward wrong. God's reaction to this overwhelming evil was one of deep sorrow. Genesis 6:6 says, "The Lord regretted making humans on the earth, and it broke his heart." This regret wasn't about making a mistake, but rather expressed deep pain over how far his creation had fallen. The use of human-like language helps show just how seriously God viewed this level of evil. His decision that followed was just as serious. "I will wipe out mankind, whom I created, from the earth, people, animals, crawling creatures and birds, for I regret that I made them," he said in Genesis 6:7. This judgment would include not just people, but also the rest of the living world that had been placed under human care, showing how connected creation and humanity were from the beginning. But in the middle of this total ruin, a single glimmer of hope appeared. Noah found favor in the Lord's eyes. Genesis 6:8. This favor, grace that wasn't earned, became the starting point for saving the human race. Noah is described in Genesis 6:9 as a good man, blameless among others in his time, who walked closely with God, just like Enoch. This doesn't mean Noah was without sin, but that he stood apart because of his integrity. While others turned from God, Noah stayed faithful. Later events would show that Noah had flaws. What made him different wasn't perfection, but his openness to God's grace. In the face of worldwide evil, God shared his plan with Noah, both the coming destruction and the way to be saved. Genesis 6:13-14 records, God's words, "I am going to end all life, because the earth is filled with violence. I will destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark out of gopher wood." God gave very clear and detailed directions. The boat had to be built from a specific kind of wood, maybe cypress, and sealed with pitch inside and out to keep it waterproof. Its size was to be 300 cubits long, 50 wide, and 30 high, around 135 meters long, 23 meters wide, and 14 meters high, with 3 levels, 1 door on the side, and a window. This wasn't meant to sail, it was built to float. Its design focused on staying steady and holding a lot, not on moving fast or steering. Building such a huge structure on dry land, likely far from any sea or lake, must have seemed ridiculous to the people around Noah. The Apostle Peter later called Noah a preacher of righteousness, 2 Peter 2:5, which implies that during the many years of building, Noah also warned others of what was coming and urged them to change. But no one listened. As part of the instructions, God also made a promise with Noah. "But I will make my covenant with you. You will go into the ark, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you." Genesis 6:18. This is the first time a covenant is clearly mentioned in the Bible. It sets the stage for future agreements between God and people, starting with God's action, followed by human obedience, promises given, and survival during judgment. The rescue plan God gave to Noah wasn't just for him and his loved ones. It also included animals from every kind. Genesis 6:19 says, "You are to bring 2 of every kind of living creature into the ark, to keep them alive with you, 1 male and 1 female." Animals considered pure and suitable for offerings would enter in groups of 7 pairs, while others came in just 1 pair. This plan allowed both for keeping animal life going and for future acts of worship. Noah's response to all these instructions showed his trust. Genesis 6:22 says Noah did everything exactly as God told him. His full obedience stood out against the widespread disobedience around him. It showed that real faith involves more than belief. It moves a person to act on what God says. When the work was done and the animals were gathered, God gave the next command. Genesis 7:1 says, "Then the Lord said to Noah, 'Enter the ark, you and your entire household, because I have seen that you are righteous among the people of this time.'" Noah and his family went into the ark 7 days before the storm started, a final pause before disaster struck. Then came the great flood. In Noah's 600th year, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, the Bible says, "All the deep springs under the earth burst open, and the sky released its waters. It rained for 40 days and nights." Genesis 7:11-12. The flood wasn't only heavy rain, but also massive shifts in the earth, with underground waters rising and reshaping the planet. For 150 days, water kept rising, eventually submerging even the highest mountains. Everything on land that breathed air and wasn't in the ark died. This was judgment against a world full of corruption. Still, even in the middle of this destruction, a message of hope appears. God remembered Noah. Genesis 8:1. This doesn't mean God had forgotten. It means he was now acting for Noah's good. The waters slowly went down. The ark settled on the mountains of Ararat. Noah released birds to see if the land was drying, and after more than a year inside, they were finally able to leave. Genesis 8:15-16 says, "Then God said to Noah, 'Leave the ark, you, your wife, your sons, and their wives.'" The ground was now dry and ready for life again. A fresh world stood before Noah's family, the ones God had chosen to save. Noah's first act showed his heart. Genesis 8:20 tells us, "Noah built an altar to the Lord. He took some of every clean animal and bird and offered them as burnt offerings." Before setting up a new home, Noah worshipped. His sacrifice honored God's kindness and recognized the need to seek forgiveness, because sin was still part of this new beginning. God answered Noah with a promise. In Genesis 8:21-22, he said, "I will never again curse the ground because of humans, even though people's hearts are inclined to evil from childhood. I will never again destroy all living things as I have done. As long as the earth remains, planting and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never stop." God then made this commitment official. In Genesis 9:11, he declared, "I now establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be wiped out by floodwaters. Never again will a flood destroy the earth." As a sign of this promise, God placed a rainbow in the sky. This visible reminder would speak to future generations about God's faithfulness. The covenant also came with new instructions. First, God repeated the command to fill the earth. Second, he allowed people to eat animals with one condition: but you must not eat meat that still has blood in it, which is its life. Genesis 9:4. Third, God gave the first law about murder. Genesis 9:6 says, "Whoever takes a human life, that person's life will be taken by humans, for God made humans in his own image." This covenant included blessings for all people, dependable seasons, various food sources, and basic rules for justice, all essential for society to grow in a world still marked by sin. Even Noah, though faithful and close to God, was not perfect. Genesis 9:20-21 tells us, Noah became a farmer, planted a vineyard, drank some wine, got drunk, and lay uncovered inside his tent. This story shows that even people of strong faith can stumble. How his sons responded reveals their values. Genesis 9:22 says, Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his two brothers outside. Ham's behavior showed a lack of respect for Noah's dignity. But Genesis 9:23 describes what Shem and Japheth did instead. They took a robe, placed it on their shoulders, walked in backward, and covered their father. They kept their faces turned so they wouldn't see him. Their actions reflected respect and care, even during their father's embarrassing moment. When Noah found out, he responded with a prophetic message. In Genesis 9:24-27, he said, "Cursed is Canaan. He will be the lowest of servants to his brothers. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan serve him. May God expand Japheth's territory, and may he live in Shem's tents, with Canaan serving them." Strangely, the curse fell on Canaan, Ham's son. This may hint at what the Canaanite people would later become. In time, this prophecy came true when the Israelites, Shem's descendants, defeated the Canaanites. The blessings for Shem and Japheth also carried deep meaning. The mention of the Lord, the God of Shem, points ahead to the special role Shem's descendants would play in God's plan. His blessing also hinted at the future spread of Japheth's family, later linked with Indo-European peoples. This short event carried deep meaning, setting patterns that echoed through the Bible, showing how honor or dishonor toward those in authority can shape future generations. Genesis 10 gives a detailed account of how humanity spread out after the flood. This list of Noah's descendants helps explain the roots and connections of ancient peoples. The chapter opens with, "These are the descendants of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood." Genesis 10:1. It then traces each family line in order. Japheth's line, Genesis 10:2-5, is linked to groups that moved into regions north and west of Mesopotamia, places like Asia Minor, the Mediterranean islands, and parts of Europe. Names like Gomer, Madai, and Javan are tied to the Sumerians, the Medes, and early Greeks. Ham's descendants, Genesis 10:6-20, are associated mostly with Africa and parts of the Middle East, including Egypt, Ethiopia, and Canaan. The text focuses on Nimrod, Ham's grandson, calling him a strong hunter and the builder of key Mesopotamian cities like Babel and Nineveh. The Canaanites, Ham's descendants through Canaan, are described with defined borders. These same lands would later be given to Israel, an important detail for the first readers of Genesis. Next come Shem's descendants, Genesis 10:21-31, with special attention on Eber, possibly the origin of the term Hebrews. His line includes the ancestors of Aramaic and Arab peoples. This genealogy is vital because Shem's family leads to Abraham and eventually to the Israelites. The chapter ends with Genesis 10:32. "These are the families of Noah's sons, by their lines and nations. From them the nations spread across the earth after the flood." This list shows that all people come from one source, Noah, and before him Adam. It served several purposes. It placed Israel among the other nations, explained their relationships, gave historical grounding for future conquests, and set up Abraham's calling as the one through whom all families on earth would be blessed. While Genesis 10 outlines how people scattered, Genesis 11 explains why that scattering happened. It starts with this statement: the whole earth had one language and the same words. Genesis 11:1. With one shared language, people could work together without limits. One group moved east and settled in the plain of Shinar in Mesopotamia. There, their unity led to a bold plan. Genesis 11:4 says they said, "Come, let's build a city with a tower that reaches the sky. Let's make a name for ourselves so we won't be scattered over the earth." The building project revealed deeper issues. The idea of a tower that reaches the heavens hinted not only at advanced knowledge, but also at a desire to rise to the level of God. Their goal of making a name for ourselves showed human pride. Most telling was their reason: so we won't be scattered. This directly opposed God's command in Genesis 9:1 to spread out and fill the earth. God's reply is described with a hint of irony. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower the people were building. Genesis 11:5. This shows the contrast between what humans thought was impressive and how small it was to God. God's concern was clear. He recognized the danger of a united human race acting in rebellion. Look, they are one people with one language. This is just the start. Nothing they plan will be impossible for them, he said in Genesis 11:6. His intervention wasn't just punishment. It was meant to slow the growth of shared evil. "Let's go down and confuse their language so they can't understand each other," he declared. As a result, the Lord scattered them over the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Genesis 11:7-8. Different languages created divisions that broke up the project. The place was named Babel, meaning confusion, which became a lasting symbol of the failure of human pride when it ignores God. Still, scattering the people also included mercy. It stopped evil from spreading unchecked and encouraged the rise of unique cultures, each offering something different to the world. Ironically, their wish to make a name for themselves came true, but as a reminder of failed human ambition before God's higher authority. After Babel, the story narrows in scope, from all people to one specific family. Genesis 11:10-32 offers a genealogy tracing Shem's descendants down to Terah and his sons, one of whom was Abram, later called Abraham. This shows Abram as part of Shem's blessed line, connected to Noah's promise, and one of the few who still knew the true God in a world turning to idols. At first, Terah leads the family out of Ur in Babylon, intending to go to Canaan, but they stop in Haran. There, Terah dies, and Abram's journey begins. Now 75 and living in Haran, Abram receives a call that changes the whole story of redemption. Genesis 12:1-3 records, "The Lord said to Abram, 'Leave your country, your people, and your father's household and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great. Be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. Through you, all families on earth will be blessed.'" This call asked Abram to let go of 3 pillars of his identity: his land, his people, and his family, leaving behind all that gave him a sense of belonging. God's promises to him covered 3 key areas: land, the land I will show you; descendants, a great nation, which was especially striking since Sarai was unable to have children, and blessing, both personal and global, as through Abram, the whole world would be blessed. This final promise stands out, especially after the events at Babel. Once people had scattered, God began reuniting and healing humanity, not through human efforts like the tower, but through his own plan, starting with a specific man. Abram's reaction is told in few words. "So Abram went, as the Lord had told him," Genesis 12:4. The story doesn't mention any hesitation, just that Abram obeyed right away, showing great faith. Later, Hebrews 11:8 explains it this way: "By faith, Abraham obeyed and left for a place he would one day receive, even though he didn't know where he was going." Once in Canaan, Abram received more reassurance. God appeared to him and said, "I will give this land to your children." Genesis 12:7. The land God had promised was now clearly named as Canaan, the same area lived in by Canaan's descendants, whom Noah had earlier cursed. Abram responded by building an altar, one of many he would raise during his time in the land. These altars served both as worship sites and as signs of future ownership, showing his belief that his descendants would one day live there. After his call, Abraham's life became a journey both physically and spiritually. He didn't stay in one spot, but traveled through Canaan, from Shechem to Bethel, and then toward the Negev. This habit of moving, often with an altar built at each stop, showed Abraham's role as a traveler. He lived in the Promised Land as someone who didn't fully belong there yet, holding on to God's promises. Not long after arriving, Abraham faced a challenge. A famine struck, and Abram went to Egypt to stay for a while because the famine was harsh, Genesis 12:10. This hardship caused him to leave the land for a time. Worried about danger, Abraham asked Sarai to say she was only his sister, hiding that they were married. As expected, Sarai's looks caught the attention of Egypt's nobles, and she was brought to Pharaoh's palace. Things could have gone very wrong. Sarai, meant to be the future mother of a great nation, was now in Pharaoh's home. But God stepped in. The Lord sent terrible illnesses to Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai, Genesis 12:17. Afterward, Abraham went back to Canaan. There, another problem came up. The land couldn't support both his and Lot's groups, and their workers started to argue. Abraham showed kindness and faith by letting Lot pick first. Lot chose the lush Jordan Valley and ended up living in Sodom. After Lot and Abraham parted ways, God restated his promise. "Look around you in every direction, north, south, east, and west. All the land you see will belong to you and your descendants forever." Genesis 13:14-15. This time, the promise mentioned more clearly how large the land would be. Not long after, Abraham got involved in a local war when kings from Mesopotamia attacked the valley cities and took Lot as a prisoner. Abraham gathered his men, rescued Lot, and recovered all the stolen possessions. This moment also introduced Melchizedek, the mysterious king and priest of Salem. He gave Abraham a blessing and received 1/10 of what Abraham had gained. Following this, God made a formal agreement with Abraham through a serious ritual. Animals were split in two, and a blazing torch passed between them. Genesis 15:18 says, "On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, 'I give this land to your descendants, from Egypt's river to the great Euphrates.'" This event showed that God alone took on the responsibility to keep this promise forever. Each reminder of this agreement helped Abraham trust more deeply as he continued his long walk through a land that would one day belong to his family. His home life, however, showed both his strong faith and his human weaknesses. The biggest problem was the lack of children. Sarai, his wife, had not been able to give him a son. Genesis 16:1 tells us that after 10 years in Canaan without a child, Sarai said something typical for that time: "The Lord has kept me from having children. Sleep with my servant, maybe I can have a child through her." Genesis 16:2 explains that Abraham agreed, and Sarai's Egyptian servant Hagar became pregnant. Trouble followed right away. Once Hagar knew she was expecting, she started looking down on Sarai. Genesis 16:4 describes how things quickly turned bitter between them. Sarai treated Hagar so badly that she ran away into the desert. There, a messenger from God found her and told her to return and obey Sarai. He also gave her a promise: "I will give you so many descendants that they cannot be counted." Genesis 16:10. Hagar went back, and later gave birth to Ishmael when Abraham was 86 years old. 13 years passed. Then God appeared to Abraham again, repeating his promise and making key changes. First, their names changed. Abram, meaning exalted father, became Abraham, meaning father of many. Sarai's name also became Sarah, showing God's plan for many descendants. Next, God introduced circumcision as a physical sign of the promise, a practice that all males in Abraham's household had to follow. But the biggest news was that God clearly said Sarah herself would have a son within 1 year, even though she was already very old. Abraham's first reaction was doubt. Abraham bowed low to the ground and laughed to himself, thinking, "Can a man who's 100 years old really have a child? And can Sarah, at 90, give birth?" Genesis 17:17. He suggested making Ishmael the chosen heir, but God responded firmly, "Your wife Sarah will have a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will make my promise with him, a promise that will last forever and extend to his children." Genesis 17:19. Soon after, 3 strange visitors came to Abraham. One of them, revealed to be the Lord, repeated the promise. Sarah, listening from the tent, laughed in doubt. But she was gently reminded, "Is anything too difficult for the Lord?" Genesis 18:14. Just as promised, Sarah became pregnant and had a son named Isaac when Abraham was 100 and she was 90. The name Isaac, meaning he laughs, captured how doubt turned into joy. Sarah said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears this will laugh with me." Genesis 21:6. But Isaac's birth also stirred up tension in the family. At Isaac's celebration feast, Sarah saw Ishmael making fun of him. She said, "Send away this servant woman and her son. He will not share the inheritance with my son Isaac." Genesis 21:10. Though it saddened Abraham, God supported her request and promised that Ishmael too would become a great nation. Abraham then faced the hardest test of all. God told him, "Take your son Isaac, your only son whom you love, and go to Moriah. Offer him there as a burnt sacrifice on a mountain. I will show you." Genesis 22:2. Without hesitation, Abraham followed God's instructions. Just before the sacrifice, God stopped him. This powerful moment showed Abraham's deep faith and revealed that God does not want human sacrifices. Instead, he provided a ram in Isaac's place, hinting at the future idea of substitutionary sacrifice in Israel's faith. This event brought the strongest confirmation of God's promise yet. "I swear by myself," said the Lord, "because you obeyed, I will surely bless you. All nations on earth will be blessed through your descendants." Genesis 22:16-18. After Sarah died, Abraham arranged for Isaac to marry someone from his own people in Haran, not a local Canaanite. Guided by God, Abraham's servant found Rebekah at a well and recognized her as the one chosen for Isaac. Their story begins in Genesis 24:67. Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother Sarah's tent. She became his wife, and he loved her. But like Sarah, Rebekah couldn't have children at first. In Genesis 25:21, it says that Isaac prayed for her, and God answered. She became pregnant. But the pregnancy was difficult. The children struggled inside her womb. Genesis 25:22. Seeking guidance from God, Rebekah was given an important message. "You are carrying 2 nations inside you. 2 different groups will come from within you. One will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." Genesis 25:23. When the twins were born, they were very different. Esau was born first. His skin was red, and he was covered in hair like a coat. Genesis 25:25. Jacob came next, holding onto Esau's heel. Their appearance hinted at their future personalities and paths in life. As they grew older, Esau became a skilled hunter who spent time outdoors. Jacob was quiet and stayed at home in tents. Genesis 25:27. Even their parents had favorites. Isaac preferred Esau because he enjoyed the wild meat he brought home, while Rebekah cared more for Jacob. Genesis 25:28. This favoritism laid the groundwork for problems later on. The first major conflict happened when Esau came back from the fields feeling very tired and hungry. Jacob was making stew and saw a chance to make a deal. "Sell me your rights as the firstborn," he said. Genesis 25:31. Esau, focused on his hunger rather than his future, replied, "I'm about to die anyway. What use is a birthright to me?" Genesis 25:32. By trading it away so easily, Esau showed he didn't value it. Genesis 25:34. Years passed. When Isaac was old and nearly blind, he planned to bless Esau. Rebekah, remembering what God had said, came up with a plan. She dressed Jacob like Esau, cooked a meal Isaac would like, and told Jacob to pretend to be the firstborn. The plan worked. Isaac gave Jacob the blessing meant for Esau. "Let nations serve you and bow down before you. Those who curse you will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed." Genesis 27:29. When Esau learned the truth, he cried out in deep pain, "Bless me too, Father." Genesis 27:34. Isaac, unable to take the blessing back, gave Esau a lesser one. Esau would live with difficulty, but would one day break free from Jacob. Angry and hurt, Esau decided he would kill Jacob after their father died. Knowing Jacob's life was in danger, Rebekah made plans for him to escape to her brother Laban in Haran. While the reason given was to find a wife, her real goal was to protect him. So the chosen heir left his home, not in triumph, but as a runaway facing an uncertain road ahead. This family drama shows how God carries out his will even when people act wrongly, through favoritism, manipulation, and lies. None of these actions were right, but all became part of the promise made before the twins were born. On the way to Haran, Jacob had a powerful spiritual experience. At a place later named Bethel, he dreamed one night of a stairway reaching from earth to the sky, with angels moving up and down. Genesis 28:12. At the top stood God, confirming the promise made to Abraham. "I am the God of your grandfather Abraham and your father Isaac. This ground where you sleep will belong to you and your descendants." Genesis 28:13. When Jacob woke up, he realized the place was holy. "God is truly here, and I didn't know it," he said. Genesis 28:16. He built a stone pillar and made a vow, asking for God's protection during his journey. It was a sign that his faith was starting to grow, even if not yet fully developed. When Jacob reached Haran, he met Rachel, Laban's daughter, and quickly fell in love. He offered to work 7 years to marry her, but because of his love, the time passed quickly. Genesis 29:20. But Laban tricked him. On the wedding night, he gave Jacob Leah, Rachel's older sister. The next day, Laban explained, "In our land, the older daughter must marry before the younger." Genesis 29:26. This was ironic, given Jacob had taken his older brother's place. Jacob then agreed to work 7 more years to marry Rachel, ending up with both sisters as wives. During his time in Haran, Jacob had 11 sons and 1 daughter through his wives and their servants. These sons would later form the 12 tribes of Israel, with Joseph's 2 sons becoming separate tribes. After 20 years, Jacob chose to return to Canaan. Laban didn't want to lose him, since Jacob's work brought great success. Jacob left secretly, and when Laban caught up, they made peace with a stone marker called Galid. But Jacob's biggest fear was seeing Esau again, the brother who had once threatened his life. He sent messengers ahead, only to hear that Esau was approaching with 400 men. Terrified, Jacob split his group in 2 to protect them, sent generous gifts to calm Esau, and spent 1 life-changing night wrestling a mysterious figure. Genesis 32:24-30. Jacob was left by himself, and a man came and wrestled with him until morning. The man asked, "What's your name?" "Jacob," he replied. Then the man said, "You will no longer be called Jacob. From now on, your name will be Israel, because you have wrestled with both God and people, and you have overcome." This new name reflected a change inside him, from Jacob, the one who takes what belongs to others, to Israel, meaning one who wrestles with God or a prince of God. The man who once used tricks to gain blessings now received one after a sincere, personal struggle. Wounded in the hip from the fight, Jacob approached Esau no longer as a schemer, but as someone changed by a divine encounter. To his surprise, Esau welcomed him with peace, not anger. Esau ran toward him, hugged him tightly, kissed him, and they both cried. Genesis 33:4. After their emotional meeting, the brothers separated. Esau went back to Seir, while Jacob moved first to Succoth and then to Shechem. Life in Canaan brought Jacob new hardships. His daughter Dinah was assaulted. His sons responded with brutal revenge on the town of Shechem. His wife Rachel died giving birth to Benjamin, and his son Reuben dishonored him by sleeping with Bilhah. Still, he had moments of renewed faith, especially when he returned to Bethel, where God confirmed his new name and the promises made to his family. Of Jacob's 12 sons, Joseph was his favorite. Israel loved him more than the others because he had been born in his old age, and he gave him a special, multicolored robe. Genesis 37:3. This favoritism, along with Joseph's dreams about ruling over his family, made his brothers deeply jealous. They couldn't speak kindly to him. Genesis 37:4. Their envy boiled over when Joseph was sent to check on them in a distant pasture. "Here comes that dreamer," they said. "Let's kill him and throw him into a pit." Genesis 37:19-20. Reuben stepped in to prevent his death, suggesting they toss Joseph into a pit alive, hoping to rescue him later. But before he could act, Judah proposed selling Joseph to a group of Ishmaelite traders. For 20 silver coins, they sold him, and Joseph was taken to Egypt. To hide the truth, they soaked Joseph's colorful robe in goat's blood and gave it to Jacob, who believed a wild beast had killed his son. In Egypt, Joseph was sold to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh. With God's help, Joseph succeeded. Potiphar noticed that the Lord was with Joseph and made him successful in all he did. Genesis 39:2-3. Impressed, Potiphar put Joseph in charge of his entire household. Joseph's situation changed dramatically when Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. He continually refused, saying, "How could I do something so wrong and offend God?" Genesis 39:9. After being rejected, she falsely claimed that Joseph had attacked her, which led to his imprisonment. Even while in jail, God remained with Joseph. He was kind to him and helped him win the trust of the prison guard. Genesis 39:21. The guard eventually put Joseph in charge of the other inmates. During this time, Joseph interpreted the dreams of 2 officials from Pharaoh's court, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. His explanations turned out to be true. The cupbearer was restored to his position, while the baker was executed. Joseph asked the cupbearer to mention him to Pharaoh, but the cupbearer forgot all about him. Genesis 40:23. 2 years later, Pharaoh began having troubling dreams that none of his wise men could explain. That's when the cupbearer finally remembered Joseph. Taken out of prison, Joseph said to Pharaoh, "I don't have the power to interpret dreams, but God will provide the meaning you seek." Genesis 41:16. He explained that the dreams foretold 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. Joseph advised Pharaoh to appoint someone wise to manage the food supply during the good years. Pharaoh was so impressed by Joseph's insight that he chose him for the job. "I'm putting you in charge of the entire land of Egypt," he declared. Genesis 41:41. At just 30 years old, Joseph rose from prisoner to governor. Pharaoh gave him a royal ring, elegant clothes, a gold chain, a chariot, and a new Egyptian name, Zaphanath-Paneah. Joseph also married Asenath, a woman from a noble family, and had 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. As predicted, Egypt enjoyed 7 years of abundance, followed by a terrible famine that spread to other lands. When food ran low in Canaan, Jacob sent 10 of his sons to buy grain in Egypt, keeping Benjamin, his youngest, at home. The brothers didn't recognize Joseph, now an Egyptian leader, but he knew who they were. Without revealing himself, Joseph accused them of spying and demanded they bring their youngest brother to prove their honesty. He held Simeon in custody and secretly returned their payment inside their grain sacks. When the famine worsened, Jacob finally allowed Benjamin to go, with Judah personally guaranteeing his safety. On their return, Joseph invited them to a meal. Overcome with emotion when he saw Benjamin, he carried out one final test. He had his silver cup hidden in Benjamin's sack and then accused them of theft. When Benjamin was caught, Judah stepped forward and offered to take his place as a slave, saying their father could not bear to lose another son of Rachel. Judah's willingness to sacrifice himself showed how much he and his brothers had changed, especially considering he was the one who had once suggested selling Joseph. Deeply moved, Joseph finally revealed who he was. "I am Joseph, your brother, the one you sold into slavery in Egypt." Genesis 45:4. Seeing their fear and shock, Joseph reassured them and explained that everything had happened for a greater purpose. "Don't blame yourselves for selling me. God sent me ahead to save lives," he said. Genesis 45:5. Joseph then invited the whole family to come live in Egypt under his care, since 5 more years of famine remained. With Pharaoh's approval, Jacob and his household, 70 people in total, moved to Egypt and settled in Goshen, a rich and fertile land. The reunion between Jacob and Joseph was filled with emotion. Now that he had seen his son alive, Jacob said, "I can die in peace." Genesis 46:30. He lived another 17 years in Egypt, during which he blessed all his sons, giving special attention to Joseph's 2 sons and treating them as his own. Before dying, Jacob asked Joseph to bury him not in Egypt, but in the family tomb in Canaan. Joseph kept that promise, leading a large funeral procession to the burial place at Machpelah. This act showed their belief that their true homeland was still in Canaan, as God had promised. Years later, as Joseph neared death, he made a similar declaration: "I will soon die, but God will bring you out of this land to the one he swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Genesis 50:24. He made his family swear to take his bones back to Canaan when that time came, a sign of faith in a future deliverance, which would happen centuries later during the Exodus. So, the story of the patriarchs ends with the family living far from the promised land, yet still holding on to God's promises. In Egypt, Jacob's descendants grew quickly. The Israelites were very fruitful, multiplied greatly, and became so many that the land was filled with them. Exodus 1:7. This rapid growth fulfilled God's vow to make Abraham's family into a mighty nation, but success brought danger. A new Pharaoh rose to power, one who knew nothing of Joseph. Exodus 1:8. Seeing the Israelites' growing numbers, he saw a threat. To control them, he forced them into hard labor. Exodus 1:11. But the more he oppressed them, the more they grew. Exodus 1:12. So Pharaoh turned to harsher tactics, telling the Hebrew midwives to secretly kill all newborn boys. When the midwives refused to obey Pharaoh's orders, he issued a public command: every newborn Hebrew boy must be thrown into the river. Exodus 1:22. It was during this period of deadly persecution that Moses was born. As recorded in Exodus 2:2, a woman gave birth to a son, and seeing he was special, hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer conceal him, she crafted a small basket from papyrus, sealed it with tar and pitch, and placed her baby inside. She set the basket among the reeds along the Nile's edge. Exodus 2:3. By divine intervention, Pharaoh's daughter discovered the baby and chose to rescue him. His sister, Miriam, suggested finding a Hebrew woman to nurse the child and brought their own mother. So Moses' mother was paid to care for her own son until he was old enough to live with Pharaoh's daughter. She named him Moses, explaining, "I pulled him from the water." Exodus 2:10. Moses grew up with immense privilege, receiving an elite Egyptian education while still knowing he was Hebrew. At age 40, this inner tension exploded when he killed an Egyptian who was attacking a Hebrew slave. When his actions became known, Moses fled to Midian. There, he married Zipporah, daughter of a local priest named Jethro, and spent the next 40 years tending sheep, an unexpected preparation for leading a nation. Then came a life-changing moment. As described in Exodus 3:2, an angel appeared in flames inside a bush that burned but didn't burn up. As Moses came closer, God called his name and warned him to show reverence. "Take off your sandals, this is sacred ground." Exodus 3:5. God declared, "I have seen the suffering of my people and I've come to rescue them." Exodus 3:7-8. He then gave Moses a mission. "Go now, I am sending you to Pharaoh to lead my people out." Exodus 3:10. Moses hesitated and questioned his ability. When he asked God's name, the reply was deep and powerful. "I am who I am. Tell Israel that I am has sent you." Exodus 3:14. This name spoke of eternal being and unchanging nature. Even after this, Moses still resisted, so God appointed his brother Aaron to speak for him. Back in Egypt, Moses and Aaron met with Israel's elders, performed signs, and announced God's plan of deliverance. The people believed them at first, but when Moses told Pharaoh, "Let my people go," Exodus 5:1, Pharaoh replied with scorn, "Who is the Lord? I don't know him, and I will not release Israel." Exodus 5:2. He responded by making their work even harder, forcing them to make the same number of bricks without straw. The people grew angry with Moses, and in pain he cried out to God, beginning to understand that freeing others would not be quick or easy, and not all would support him, even those he came to save. God responded to Moses' desperate cry with assurance. "Now you will witness what I will do to Pharaoh. By my mighty hand, he will be forced to let them go." Exodus 6:1. The moment had come for God's power to be revealed in astonishing ways. The first plague began after Pharaoh rejected the demand to release the Israelites. Moses struck the Nile River with his staff, and as written in Exodus 7:20-21, all the river's water turned into blood. The fish died, and the water gave off a terrible odor. This was a direct blow to the Nile, which the Egyptians viewed as sacred, but Pharaoh's heart remained hard, leading to a second plague. Frogs poured out of the river and invaded the land. This was a challenge to Heket, the goddess of fertility. Pharaoh pleaded for the plague to stop, promising to let the Israelites go, but once the frogs disappeared, he broke his word. The third plague came without warning. Dust turned into lice or gnats that covered people and animals. This time, Pharaoh's magicians couldn't replicate the sign. They admitted, "This is God's doing." Exodus 8:19. The fourth plague, swarms of flies, introduced a key moment. God said, "I will set apart my people from yours." Exodus 8:23. From this point, the Israelites in Goshen were untouched by the plagues. Next came disease that killed the Egyptians' livestock, striking at gods linked to animals. Then boils appeared on people and animals, causing painful sores. Exodus 9:10. The seventh plague brought a storm of hail and fire. Before it hit, God warned the Egyptians to shelter their animals. Some listened and were spared, others ignored the warning and faced destruction. The eighth plague, locusts, devoured every remaining plant. Even Pharaoh's advisors begged him to release the Israelites. Still, Pharaoh resisted. The ninth plague brought darkness so thick it could be felt. It lasted 3 days, but the Israelites had light in their homes. Exodus 10:23. This was a strike against Ra, the sun god. Yet Pharaoh still refused full release. Then came the final plague, the death of every firstborn in Egypt, a judgment on all Egyptian gods. Exodus 12:12. God instructed the Israelites to prepare a lamb, mark their doorways with its blood, and eat it with bitter herbs and flat bread. When I see the blood, I will pass over you. Exodus 12:13. At midnight, death came as promised. A loud wail echoed throughout Egypt. Every home had lost someone. Exodus 12:30. At last, Pharaoh gave in and said, "Get up! Leave my people!" Exodus 12:31. The 10 disasters proved that Israel's God was stronger than all the gods worshipped in Egypt, showing control over nature that the Egyptians believed was ruled by many different divine beings. The Israelites left Egypt quickly. Following instructions, they asked the Egyptians for silver, gold, and clothes, and the Egyptians gave them what they asked for. Exodus 12:35. This was seen as repayment for their long years of slavery. The group that left was huge, around 600,000 men walking, not counting the children. Exodus 12:37. When adding women and kids, the total number likely went beyond 2 million. From the start, God directed their path. He appeared in a tall cloud during the day and in a pillar of fire at night. Exodus 13:21. This constant sign of God's presence showed them where to go at all times. Interestingly, God didn't take them the quickest way. Instead, he led them to a spot between the sea and the Egyptian army that was coming after them. Soon after they left, Pharaoh sent his soldiers to bring them back. When the Israelites saw the army coming, they were terrified. "Did you bring us out here just to die? Weren't there enough graves back in Egypt?" Exodus 14:11. But Moses stayed calm and said, "Don't be scared. Stay where you are and watch what God will do. He will fight for you." Exodus 14:13.14. What happened next was one of the most powerful miracles ever recorded. Exodus 14:21-22 says Moses raised his hand over the sea, and God made a strong wind blow all night, pushing the water back and creating dry ground. The water split, and the people walked through on dry land, with walls of water on both sides. The Egyptians followed them into the path, but God caused confusion among their troops. Exodus 14:24. Once the Israelites reached safety, the sea returned to its place, drowning Pharaoh's army, including his chariots and horsemen. Exodus 14:28. This moment showed God's total authority. The Israelites witnessed God's mighty act against Egypt, and they were filled with awe and trust. Exodus 14:31. In celebration, Moses led the people in a song of praise, and Miriam guided the women with dancing and tambourines. This event became the most important memory of how God saved them and was often mentioned as proof of his power. But joy turned to struggle as they began life in the desert. Only 3 days later, they hit a problem. They reached a place called Mara, but the water there was too bitter to drink. Exodus 15:23. The people turned on Moses, who prayed to God. God told him to throw a piece of wood into the bitter water. Moses obeyed, and the water became good to drink. This event began a recurring pattern: trouble, complaining, divine help, and a spiritual lesson. Their next stop was Elim, a peaceful place with 12 water springs and 70 palm trees. Exodus 15:27. But this rest didn't last long. When their Egyptian food supplies were gone, they grumbled again. God answered with two types of food. In the evening they would have meat, and in the morning they would have bread. Exodus 16:12. Quails arrived at night, and in the morning a thin layer of flakes like frost covered the ground. That was the manna, Exodus 16:14. God gave clear instructions about the manna. Only collect enough for one day. On the sixth day, gather twice as much to rest on the Sabbath. These rules helped them learn to trust God daily and keep the Sabbath holy. The Israelites lived on manna for 40 years until they entered the land where people already lived, Exodus 16:35. Later, at a place called Rephidim, they faced another shortage of water. God told Moses to hit a rock with his staff, and water came out for everyone to drink. At Rephidim, they also had their first battle. The Amalekites attacked, and Joshua led the army. Moses raised his hands during the fight, and as long as they stayed up, Israel was winning. When he got tired, Aaron and Hur held his hands up until evening. This brought Israel the win. That moment showed how success came through both action and trust in God. Before arriving at Mount Sinai, Moses' father-in-law Jethro came to visit. He noticed Moses was worn out from settling all the people's problems alone. Jethro advised him to appoint other leaders to help with judging cases. Moses accepted the advice and set up a better way to manage the community during their time in the desert. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites reached Sinai and set up camp near the mountain. Exodus 19:3-4 says, Moses climbed the mountain, and God spoke to him, telling him to say this to Israel, "You saw how I defeated Egypt and brought you to me, like an eagle carries its young." This moment introduced God's covenant. It was not based on what Israel had done, but on God's love and strength, shown when he freed them from slavery. Then came the proposal. If you listen closely and follow my agreement, you will be my special treasure above all others. You will become a kingdom of priests and a holy people. Exodus 19:5-6. This offer created a unique bond and a role with purpose. Israel would belong especially to God and act as a bridge between him and the rest of the world. This covenant didn't cancel God's earlier promise to Abraham, but gave structure to how that promise would unfold. The people all answered together, saying, "We will do everything the Lord has said." Exodus 19:8. Their reply was full of enthusiasm and honesty, but as time would show, keeping that promise would be a continual challenge. After the initial agreement to the covenant, the people began getting ready for the official moment when God would speak. Moses told them to prepare themselves for 2 days, wash their clothes, and avoid sexual activity. They were warned not to go near or touch the mountain. Exodus 19:12 says, "Keep your distance from the mountain. Don't even touch its edge. Anyone who does will be put to death." This rule showed how sacred God is and the importance of showing deep respect. On the third day, God revealed himself in a powerful way. Exodus 19:16-19 explains that early in the morning, thunder roared, lightning flashed, and a dense cloud covered the mountain. A loud trumpet sound echoed. Smoke covered Mount Sinai because God came down in fire. The smoke rose like it came from a furnace, and the entire mountain shook. The trumpet blast got louder and louder. This dramatic appearance of God was meant to inspire both wonder and fear. The people trembled and stood far away. Exodus 20:18. They recognized how far above them God was. From this incredible moment, God gave them the 10 Commandments, which became the heart of the agreement. These commandments, also called the Decalogue, formed the moral base of the covenant at Sinai. Found in Exodus 22-17 and repeated in Deuteronomy 5:6-21, these essential rules shaped how Israel would relate to God. They begin with a reminder. "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, where you were slaves." Exodus 22. This opening shows that the commands were not random rules, but a response to a God who had already shown mercy and power. Their motivation to obey came from gratitude, not just fear. The commandments fall into two main parts. The first four focus on people's relationship with God, and the last six on how to treat others. The first command makes clear, you must not worship any other gods. Exodus 23. In a world where many gods were worshipped, this demand for loyalty to just one God, even if others were believed to exist, was completely new. Later, this would grow into belief in only one true God. The second command bans idols. You must not make or worship any carved images. Exodus 24. This rule separated Israel from nearby nations, where idols were part of religious life. It kept the idea of God from being reduced to an object and prevented using rituals to try to control divine power. The third commandment protects the sacredness of God's name. Do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Exodus 27. More than just banning lies and insults, it called for deep respect for God's nature and honor. His name stood for who he truly was. The fourth commandment instructed them to keep the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day and make it holy. Exodus 28. This weekly pause carried several meanings. It recalled creation, Exodus 20:11, reminded them of their freedom from slavery, Deuteronomy 5:15, allowed them to rest physically, and created balance between work and worship. The fifth commandment tells people to respect their parents. Show honor to your father and mother, Exodus 20:12. It is the only command with a promise. So your life may be long. This rule built the family structure, which supported society as a whole. Obeying parents helped pass down values and customs. The sixth commandment defends life. Do not kill. Exodus 20:13. This command was about protecting human life, because people are made in God's image. It didn't forbid all acts that cause death, like legal punishment or defending others, but it set the value of life as sacred. The seventh commandment guards marriage. Do not be unfaithful in marriage. Exodus 20:14. It protected the family unit, which was key to social order. Its place in the list shows how central the family was to the covenant way of life. The eighth commandment secures property rights. Do not steal, Exodus 20:15. By recognizing ownership, this law supported fair dealings and respect for what others possess. The ninth commandment supports truth. Do not lie about your neighbor, Exodus 20:16. Though mainly about court cases, the idea covers all honest speech. Truth was the foundation for fairness and trust among people. The 10th commandment addresses inner thoughts. Do not want what belongs to others. Exodus 20:17. Instead of just actions, this law spoke to desires and intentions. It showed that wrong desires lead to wrong actions and that true goodness begins in the heart. These teachings were different from other ancient laws because they were short, clear, and concerned with inner morals. They formed a moral base that expanded into many detailed rules and were later summed up by Jesus as love for God and others. After God gave the 10 Commandments, Moses received more detailed laws based on them. These new instructions, found in Exodus 20, 22-23, 33, are called the Book of the Covenant. They dealt with civil life, crimes, and religious practices. Civil rules included how to treat slaves with kindness not common in other nations. At that time, laws were given concerning responsibility for harm, lending, and how to treat outsiders, widows, and orphans. These rules often showed kindness beyond what was usual, as shown in Exodus 22, 26-27. If you take your neighbor's cloak as a guarantee, give it back before sunset, because it's the only covering he has. What will he sleep in? If he cries out to me, I will hear him, because I care. Criminal laws describe penalties for different wrongdoings based on fair punishment, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, Exodus 21-24. Rather than promoting revenge, this idea actually controlled responses, stopping people from punishing beyond what was fair. Religious laws focused on worship, holy days, offerings, and giving. They banned rituals borrowed from nearby nations and required 3 special yearly festivals where all men would go before God. After these commands were given, Moses led a sacred event to confirm the covenant officially. Exodus 24:4-8 says that Moses wrote down God's words. He got up early, built an altar at the foot of the mountain, and placed 12 pillars, 1 for each tribe. He then took blood from the offerings, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant the Lord has made with you," based on these words. This event followed how covenants were made in the ancient world. The written record made everything clear. The altar and 12 pillars stood for God and the people involved. The blood represented a deep commitment, even to the point of death, and by putting it on both the altar and the people, it showed a shared promise. The phrase, "blood of the covenant," stressed how serious this agreement was. Right after this, a remarkable shared meal happened. Exodus 24:9-11 tells us that Moses, Aaron, Nadab, Abihu, and 70 elders went up the mountain and saw the God of Israel. Beneath his feet was something that looked like a surface of sapphire, clear like the sky. They looked at God, and they ate and drank. This meal showed peace and acceptance between God and Israel's leaders, proving their relationship had been restored. After the meal, God invited Moses even higher up the mountain to give him further instructions. Exodus 24:12 says, "The Lord told Moses, 'Come up to me and stay here. I will give you stone tablets with the law and commands I've written to guide the people.' Moses, joined partway by Joshua, entered the cloud that covered the mountain and remained there for 40 days and nights. During that time, God gave him specific plans for the tabernacle, the movable place of worship where God would live among his people. This next step in the Sinai story was key to setting up the right way to worship while they journeyed through the desert. Moses stayed on the mountain longer than expected, and the people grew uneasy. Exodus 32:1 says, "When the crowd saw that Moses was taking too long to return, they went to Aaron and said, 'Get up and make us gods to lead us. As for Moses, the one who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what happened to him.'" This moment of panic showed how little they had truly grasped the first 2 commandments given just weeks before. Wanting physical images of God revealed their lingering ties to Egyptian religion and their fear of being abandoned. Shockingly, Aaron gave in quickly. He told them, "Take off your gold earrings and bring them to me." Then he shaped the gold into a metal calf. Exodus 32:2-4. This golden calf, likely a young bull, didn't necessarily represent a new god, but was meant to symbolize YHWH. As Aaron said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt." Exodus 32:4. This made the sin more deceptive. It wasn't about rejecting God, but trying to worship him using images, possibly copying Egyptian idols like the Apis bull. Aaron tried to make it seem acceptable by announcing tomorrow will be a festival to the Lord. Exodus 32:5. God reacted swiftly and harshly. He told Moses, "Your people, the ones you brought out of Egypt, have ruined everything. They made a calf and are bowing to it." Exodus 32:7-8. God now referred to Israel as your people, distancing himself and showing that their bond had been damaged. He then told Moses he planned to destroy them and begin again with him. "Leave me, so my anger can burn and I'll wipe them out. Then I will make you into a great nation." Exodus 32:10. This challenged Moses, offering him a role like Abraham's. Moses' reply revealed his true leadership. He based his plea on 3 points. God's reputation among the nations, what would Egypt think? the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and God's own merciful nature. Exodus 32:14 tells us what happened next. The Lord changed his mind and did not bring the disaster he had threatened. As Moses came down and saw the idol worship for himself, his anger flared. He smashed the stone tablets, showing symbolically that the covenant had been broken. He destroyed the golden calf, crushed it into powder, mixed it with water, and made the people drink it, proving how useless their idol really was. When Aaron was confronted, he gave a feeble excuse, claiming the calf appeared on its own. I tossed the gold into the fire, and this calf came out. Exodus 32:24. His lack of responsibility was a sharp contrast to Moses' bold leadership. Moses then declared, "If you are on the Lord's side, come to me." Exodus 32:26. The Levites gathered around him and put about 3,000 people to death, likely the main leaders in the rebellion. This tough judgment sent a strong message. Breaking the covenant would bring serious consequences. Moses returned to God and offered himself in place of the people. "They've done something terrible," he said, "but if you won't forgive them, erase my name from your book." Exodus 32:31-32. God refused holding each person accountable, but he did agree to continue the covenant, with consequences that would last. This painful story taught lasting lessons: how quickly people can return to old habits, the risk of making physical images of God, the weight of the covenant, and the need for strong, faithful leaders during spiritual failure. After the golden calf incident, God renewed his covenant and gave exact instructions for building the tabernacle, a movable place where he would live among his people. Exodus 25:8 explains, "Have them make a sanctuary for me, and I will live among them." This sacred structure had an outer court and a tent divided into two rooms, the holy place and the most holy place. The most holy place held the Ark of the Covenant, a chest covered in gold. Inside were the stone tablets, a jar with manna, and later Aaron's rod that had blossomed. The atonement cover or mercy seat was on top, where sacrificial blood was placed once a year. The holy place had three objects: the incense altar, which stood for prayers going up to God; the table for the special bread, symbolizing God's care and shared fellowship; and the 7 lampstand, giving light and representing spiritual insight. Outside the tent, the courtyard had a bronze basin for washing and the altar for burnt offerings. The tabernacle used rich materials: gold, silver, bronze, fine cloth, and special wood, arranged so that value decreased the farther you moved from the most holy place. This design showed that approaching God's presence required reverence and preparation. All materials came from free will gifts. Exodus 25:2 says, "Tell the people to bring me an offering. Accept it from anyone whose heart moves them to give." Their generosity was overwhelming. Those whose hearts were stirred and who felt willing gave freely. Exodus 35:21. In fact, so much was given that Moses had to tell them to stop bringing more. God then chose skilled workers to lead the building effort. "Look, I have chosen Bezalel by name, and I have filled him with God's Spirit, giving him wisdom, understanding, and skill in all kinds of craftsmanship." Exodus 31:2-3. This marks the first time in Scripture that someone is described as filled with the Spirit, not for leading or prophesying, but for creative and technical work. When the tabernacle was finished, exactly 1 year after leaving Egypt, God's glory became visibly present. Then the cloud covered the tent, and the glory of the Lord filled it. Exodus 40:34. This visible sign confirmed that God accepted what had been done and showed that he remained among his people. The tabernacle would stay the center of Israel's worship for generations until Solomon built a permanent temple. Even more, it revealed deep themes that appear throughout the Bible: God is both beyond creation and present within it. Human sin separates people from God. Sacrifices are needed to restore that connection. And God truly wants to dwell with his people, a truth later fulfilled when Christ came in human form. The Word became flesh and lived among us, and when the Holy Spirit came to live within the church. The covenant at Sinai, with its laws, worship system, and sacred structure, set the tone for how Israel related to God. Though Israel often failed to keep it, the covenant laid out what holiness and commitment to God looked like and prepared the way for the greater covenant brought by Christ. After staying at Mount Sinai for nearly a year, receiving the law and building the tabernacle, the Israelites needed to prepare for their journey to the land God had promised. God told Moses to take a detailed census. Numbers 1.2-3 says, "Count the whole community of Israel by family groups, recording each man by name. You and Aaron are to number all men 20 years old and older who can serve in Israel's army." The result was 603,550 men ready for battle, not counting women, children, the elderly, or the Levites. The census helped organize the nation and prepare them for future battles. The Levites, who were set apart for spiritual duties, had a separate count. Numbers 3.15 states, "Count the Levites by family and clan, including every male 1 month or older." The total number was 22,000, and they were chosen to take the place of the firstborn sons from the other tribes in serving God. The camp itself was carefully arranged, with the tabernacle in the middle. Numbers 2.2 says, "The Israelites must set up camp around the tent of meeting, each family under its banner at a certain distance. 3 tribes camped on each side, Judah to the east, Reuben to the south, Ephraim to the west, and Dan to the north, each with its own banner." This arrangement made an important statement. God lived right at the heart of the people. The camp's layout reflected both unity and tribal distinction, and its cross-like formation pointed ahead to the ultimate way God would dwell with his people forever. Their movements were directed by divine signs. Numbers 9.17-18 says, "Whenever the cloud lifted from above the tent, the Israelites would set out. Wherever it settled, they stopped and camped. They moved only when the Lord told them and stayed when he commanded. Once everything was ready, including the use of silver trumpets to signal different gatherings, it was time to leave." Numbers 10.11-12 records, "On the 20th day of the 2nd month in the 2nd year, the cloud rose from the tabernacle of the covenant. Then the Israelites left the Sinai desert and traveled from one location to another until the cloud stopped in the Paran wilderness. Their march followed a strict order. Judah's group led the way, followed by the Levites carrying the disassembled tabernacle, then the rest. This organized departure began what they hoped would be a short trip to the Promised Land, but obedience quickly gave way to complaining. Numbers 11.1 says, "The people started to grumble about their troubles, and when the Lord heard, he became angry. Fire from God burned the edges of the camp. This place was named Taberah, meaning burning." This began a repeating cycle: complaints, divine punishment, Moses' prayer, and then mercy. Another complaint came soon after, this time about food. Numbers 11.4-6 tells us a group among them began craving other food. And again the people cried, "If only we had meat." We remember the free fish in Egypt, along with cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. But now we've lost our appetite. All we ever get is this manna. Their lack of gratitude for the daily miracle revealed something deeper, a longing for the past, and a failure to appreciate God's current care. This complaint crushed Moses' spirit. He cried out to God, "Why have you placed this burden on me? What have I done to deserve the responsibility for all these people?" Numbers 11.11. God replied in 2 parts. First, he shared Moses' spiritual load with 70 elders to help lead. Second, he promised an overwhelming amount of meat. The Lord said, "You will have meat, not just for a day or 2 or 5 or 10 or 20, but for a whole month." Numbers 11.18 to 20. That meat came in the form of quail that blanketed the camp, piled about 3 feet deep, stretching a full day's walk in every direction. Numbers 11.31. Yet before they could even finish eating, many were struck with a deadly plague. While the meat was still in their mouths, before they had swallowed, the Lord's anger burned again, and he struck them with a terrible illness. The area was called Kibroth Hattaavah, meaning graves of desire, because it showed how dangerous uncontrolled longing could be. Then a new complaint came, but this time from within Moses' own family. In Numbers 12.12, we read that Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because he had married a Cushite woman. They asked, "Is Moses the only one through whom the Lord has spoken? Hasn't he also spoken through us?" Their words mixed jealousy of Moses' special role with prejudice against his wife's background. God responded quickly and firmly. He called all 3 siblings to the sacred tent and defended Moses, pointing out his special relationship with him. "I speak to him directly, clearly, not in mysteries. He sees the Lord's form." Numbers 12.8. Miriam was then afflicted with leprosy, but after Moses pleaded with God, her illness was only temporary. She must stay outside the camp for 7 days, and then she can return. Numbers 12.14. Though different in cause, these complaints had similar traits: lack of thankfulness, longing for Egypt, resistance to God's chosen leader, and divine punishment softened by mercy when someone intervened. Eventually, the Israelites came to the southern edge of Canaan. They camped at Kadesh Barnea, just a short journey from the land God had promised. With God's approval and at the people's request, 12 men were chosen, 1 from each tribe, to scout the land. Numbers 13.2 says, "Send men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From every tribe choose 1 man, a leader among them." After 40 days in Canaan, the spies returned with proof of the land's richness, a cluster of grapes so big it had to be carried on a pole by 2 men. Numbers 13.23, their report confirmed God's promise. "We went to the land you sent us. It truly overflows with milk and honey, and here is its fruit." Numbers 13.27. Still, 10 of the spies added a warning. "The people living there are powerful, and the cities are large and well protected. We can't attack them. They are stronger than we are." Numbers 13.28-31. Only Caleb and Joshua stayed confident. "Let's go now and take the land. We can certainly do it." Numbers 13.30. But the people listened to the negative voices, and panic spread. Numbers 14.1-4 says, "The entire community cried out loud that night. They wept and complained against Moses and Aaron. They said to each other, 'Let's choose a new leader and go back to Egypt.'" This idea showed they were turning their backs on both Moses' guidance and God's promise. Caleb and Joshua tried to change their minds by reminding them, "If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into this land and give it to us. Just don't rebel against the Lord or be afraid of the people living in the land." Numbers 14.8-9. But what happened to Joshua and Caleb for trusting God? The crowd wanted to kill them with stones. Numbers 14.10. God stepped in right away with a serious warning. "How long will these people keep turning away from me? How long will they refuse to believe, even after all the wonders I've done? I will strike them with disease and take away their place as my people." Numbers 14:11-12. It was only because Moses pleaded passionately, reminding God about how other nations would see his actions, that complete destruction was avoided. But there were still harsh consequences. God declared, "None of those who saw my power and miracles will enter the land, but your children, the ones you thought would suffer, will go in and see the land you rejected." Numbers 14.21-23. 31. The punishment was precise. Because you explored the land for 40 days, you will bear your guilt for 40 years, 1 year for each day. Numbers 14.34. The 10 spies who discouraged the people died right away from a plague. Hoping to fix their error, the people tried to enter the land anyway, even though Moses warned them not to go. Numbers 14.45 tells us, "Then the Amalekites and Canaanites who lived in that hill country came down, attacked them, and chased them all the way to Hormah. That defeat sealed the fate of that generation. They would spend the rest of their lives wandering in the desert until all those adults who rebelled had died." What happened at Kadesh Barnea marked a major turning point. Right at the border of their long-awaited promise, the people chose fear over trust and human logic over God's word. As a result, they would wait nearly 40 years, and a whole generation would be lost because of their unbelief. In the years that followed, more opposition arose against the leaders God had chosen. One of the most serious was led by Korah, a Levite, along with Dathan and Abiram from the tribe of Reuben. Numbers 16.13 recounts, "Korah, Dathan, Abiram and others took men and stood up against Moses. 250 respected leaders joined them. They confronted Moses and Aaron and said, 'You take too much authority. Everyone in the community is holy, and the Lord is with all of us. Why do you place yourselves above the rest?'" This rebellion had two parts. Korah, being a Levite, challenged Aaron's right to the priesthood. Dathan and Abiram, as descendants of Reuben, likely resented that their tribe lost its firstborn privileges to Moses' leadership. Together, they threatened the entire leadership structure that God had established. Moses then offered a test for clarity. Each man who wanted to be a priest would bring a fire pan with incense before God. While this test was underway, Moses tried to confront Dathan and Abiram, but they refused to come. Instead, they accused him, saying, "Isn't it enough that you took us out of a land flowing with milk and honey just to let us die in the desert? Now you want to act like a ruler over us?" Numbers 16.13. Their words twisted reality, calling Egypt a place of slavery, a land of plenty. Then came swift judgment. The ground opened up and swallowed the Reubenite leaders, their families, and everything they owned, along with Korah's followers. Numbers 16.32. As for the 250 men offering incense, fire came from God and burned them up instantly. Numbers 16.35. Shockingly, the next day, the people turned on Moses and Aaron, blaming them and saying, "You have killed the Lord's people." Numbers 16.41. This unfair accusation triggered another act of judgment. A deadly plague began spreading through the camp. Moses quickly instructed Aaron, who ran through the people with burning incense to make peace with God. He placed himself between the dead and the living, and the plague stopped. Numbers 16.48. Still, 1,400 lives were lost. To make it clear once and for all who should serve as priest, God gave another sign. He told each tribe to bring a staff with its name written on it. Numbers 17.5 says, "The man I choose, his staff will blossom." The next morning, Aaron's staff had not only budded, but it also had flowers, young shoots, and even almonds. Numbers 17.8. This powerful sign confirmed Aaron's special role, and his staff was placed in the ark as a lasting reminder. Years later, close to the end of the journey in the desert, Moses and Aaron made a crucial mistake. At Meribah, when people again complained about the lack of water, God told Moses, "Speak to the rock in front of them, and it will release water." Numbers 20.8. But Moses, clearly frustrated, shouted, "Listen, you rebels! Must we bring water from this rock?" Numbers 20.10. Then he struck the rock twice with his staff. Although water came out in plenty, God saw this as a failure to follow instructions and show proper respect. "Because you didn't trust me enough to treat me as holy before the Israelites, you won't lead them into the land I'm giving them." Numbers 20.12. Moses' mistake included acting out in anger, hitting the rock instead of speaking, and possibly taking credit for the miracle. This judgment meant a new generation and new leaders would guide Israel into Canaan. As the 40 years drew to a close and the Israelites approached the promised land, more obstacles appeared. The Edomites, who were descended from Esau, blocked Israel's request to pass through their land. Numbers 20:20-21 says, "But he said, 'You may not pass.' Then Edom came out against them with a large and powerful army, so Israel turned away." Because of this denial, the Israelites had to take a longer route. During this detour, Aaron died on Mount Hor. Numbers 20:28 describes the moment of change. Moses removed Aaron's priestly robes and placed them on Eleazar, Aaron's son. Then Aaron died at the top of the mountain. The long delay caused by the detour made the people lose heart again. They began complaining once more about God and Moses. Numbers 21:5. In response, God sent poisonous snakes into the camp. The snakes bit many, and a number of Israelites died. Numbers 21:6. When the people admitted their guilt, God gave a strange solution. "Make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. Anyone bitten who looks at it will survive." Numbers 21:8. This bronze snake would later become an idol, eventually destroyed by King Hezekiah. But at that moment, it had deep spiritual meaning. Jesus later referred to it as a sign of his future death. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, so that all who believe in him may have eternal life. John 3:14-15. Coming toward Canaan from the east, Israel won major battles against Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan. These victories gave them control in the region beyond the Jordan. Their success terrified Balak, king of Moab, who hired Balaam, a well-known prophet, to curse Israel. After an unusual encounter with a talking donkey, Balaam realized he couldn't curse what God had already blessed. "I have been told to bless. He has blessed, and I can't reverse it." Numbers 23:20. Since a direct curse failed, Balaam likely suggested another method, tempting Israel with foreign worship and immoral behavior. Numbers 25:1-3 describes what happened. While Israel was staying in Shittim, some of the men began having sexual relations with Moabite women, who led them to take part in their religious sacrifices. The men ate the food offered to the idols and bowed down to foreign gods. Israel joined in worshipping Baal of Peor, and this made God very angry. This moment was more dangerous than any military threat. It showed the risk of spiritual compromise through immoral acts. God's judgment was harsh. Leaders were executed publicly, and a plague broke out, killing 24,000 people. The outbreak only stopped when Phinehas, the grandson of Aaron, boldly acted by killing an Israelite man and a Midianite woman who were openly defying God in the camp. These final experiences in the desert prepared the Israelites for what was coming in Canaan. They discovered that the threats would not only come from armies, but also from cultural influences. Winning would depend not just on battle strength, but on staying loyal to God. This new generation, shaped by the failures of their parents, was finally ready to enter the promised land under new leadership. As the journey through the wilderness drew to a close, God gave a new command to count the people again. Numbers 26:2 says, "Count the whole community of Israel, all men 20 years old and older, by family groups, all who are able to serve in the army." The result was 601,130 men, almost the same number as the first count, which had been 603,550 nearly 40 years earlier. But Numbers 26:64-65 makes it clear. None of the men from the original census were still alive, just as God had said. They all died in the wilderness. Only Caleb and Joshua remained. Although the total number of people seemed unchanged, the entire generation had been replaced. A new group now stood where the previous one had failed. This second census had several important roles. It prepared the army for the coming battles, helped plan how the land would be divided, and showed both God's judgment, removing the first generation, and his provision, keeping the population strong. During this time, various legal and organizational issues were addressed. One major concern came from the daughters of Zelophehad. Their father had died without sons, so they approached Moses and asked, "Our father died in the desert, and he had no sons. Should his name disappear from his family just because he had no sons? Please give us property along with our uncles." Numbers 27.3-4. This request introduced a new question about inheritance for women. Moses asked God, and a ruling was made. The tribe of Joseph's descendants is correct. Here is the Lord's instruction about the daughters of Zelophehad. They may marry anyone they choose, but only within their father's tribe. Numbers 36.5-6. This ensured women could inherit land while keeping it inside their tribal family. Another major issue came when the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh asked to settle east of the Jordan, in land taken from Sihon and Og. At first, Moses thought they were trying to repeat the rebellion at Kadesh Barnea. "Should your fellow Israelites go to war while you stay here?" Numbers 32.6. But the tribes explained they weren't backing out. They offered a plan. "We'll build pens for our animals and towns for our families here, but we ourselves will go armed ahead of the Israelites and help them until they're settled." Numbers 32:16-17. Moses agreed, but he warned them strongly about the danger of breaking this promise. Moses also set up 6 cities of refuge, 3 on each side of the Jordan, where people who accidentally killed someone could find safety from revenge until they stood trial. Numbers 35.11-12 says, "You are to choose cities to be places of refuge for anyone who kills a person by mistake to escape there. These cities will protect them from the avenger until they stand trial before the community." God also appointed 48 towns for the Levites, since they wouldn't be given land like the other tribes. These cities were spread across Israel, so the Levites could teach God's law everywhere. Through these legal, civic, and territorial plans, Israel was becoming more than a wandering people. It was transforming into a real nation, prepared for life in the Promised Land, with clear systems for leadership, justice, and worship. As Moses' death neared, the need for a successor became urgent. Moses turned to God and prayed, "May the Lord, the God of all living things, choose someone to lead this people, someone who will guide them in and out, so that the Lord's people are not like sheep without a shepherd." God made his instructions very clear. "Choose Joshua, son of Nun. He has the Spirit in him. Place your hand on him." He was to be brought before the priest Eleazar and the entire community, where he would be officially appointed in front of everyone. Joshua had already proven himself capable of leading. He had worked alongside Moses as his helper, see Exodus 24:13, had led Israel's army in the fight against Amalek, Exodus 17:9-14, and had remained faithful as one of the 2 spies who trusted God, Numbers 14:6-9. The ceremony marking this shift in leadership was carried out in public and carried deep meaning. Moses did exactly what God had told him. He took Joshua, brought him before Eleazar the priest, and stood him before all the people. Then Moses placed his hands on Joshua and gave him the responsibility to lead. This symbolic act showed the passing of leadership and the wisdom needed to guide the people, as later described in Deuteronomy 34:9. Still, Joshua wouldn't lead in the same way Moses did. Moses had a unique relationship with God, speaking with him directly, as stated in Deuteronomy 34:10. Joshua, however, would need to go to Eleazar the priest, who would use the Urim to seek God's decisions for him, Numbers 27:21. This arrangement highlighted Moses' one-of-a-kind role as the one who connected the people to God and delivered his messages. By making the handover of leadership smooth and thoughtful, Israel could continue moving forward, even while understanding that Moses' role couldn't be replaced. Joshua's main responsibilities would involve leading the people in battles and civil matters as they entered the Promised Land. He would not be the one receiving direct messages from God, as Moses did. This setup helped the Israelites continue living according to the teachings Moses had passed down, even after he was gone. The book of Deuteronomy is mostly made up of Moses' final words, spoken while the people were camped in the plains of Moab. Deuteronomy 1:1-3 tells us the setting. These are the words Moses spoke to all of Israel on the other side of the Jordan. It was the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day. The name Deuteronomy means second law. It doesn't introduce new rules, but instead repeats and explains the covenant for the younger generation about to enter the land. Moses' first speech goes back over their journey from Sinai, stressing both how God cared for them and how they failed. Deuteronomy 1:30-32 expresses this contrast. The Lord your God went ahead of you and fought for you. Like he did in Egypt, in the desert he carried you like a father carries his son. Still you didn't trust him. This honest summary had two goals: to help the younger generation learn from past mistakes and to show that their upcoming victory in Canaan was entirely because of God's love, not because they deserved it. Deuteronomy 4:37-38 explains, because he loved your ancestors and chose their descendants, he removed powerful nations before you and gave you their land to own. Moses then reminded them of the heart of their agreement with God by repeating the Ten Commandments, Deuteronomy 5:6-21. Interestingly, while Exodus 20 links the Sabbath to creation, this version ties it to being freed from Egypt. You were once slaves in Egypt, and it was the Lord your God who rescued you from that place. For this reason, he has instructed you to honor the Sabbath day, Deuteronomy 5:15. This focus on remembering God's saving power as the reason to obey him leads to one of the most well-known declarations in Scripture. Listen, Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. Deuteronomy 6:4-5. This command invites full devotion, not just rule following, and shows that love from the heart is at the center of the covenant relationship. Moses kept urging the people to avoid adopting the customs of the Canaanites. In Deuteronomy 7:2-4, he told them, "When God hands these nations over to you, destroy them completely. Don't make agreements with them or show them mercy, because they will lead your children away from following me and into worshipping other gods." This call to remain separate wasn't about Israel being better than others. Deuteronomy 7:7-8 explains it clearly. God didn't choose you because you were great in number. In fact, you were the fewest, but he chose you because he loved you. This idea that God's love and calling are acts of grace, not based on human achievement, would shape Israel's beliefs for generations. Moses also warned that success could lead people to forget God. When you have eaten and are satisfied, remember to bless the Lord for the land he gave you, but be careful not to forget him. When life becomes comfortable, you may become proud and forget the one who saved you from Egypt. Deuteronomy 8:10-14. Moses foresaw how people often turn from God when they begin to feel self-sufficient and no longer rely on him. The first speech also highlighted how essential it was to keep teaching God's laws. Deuteronomy 6:6-7 says, "These commandments should be on your heart. Teach them carefully to your children. Talk about them at home, on your journeys, when you lie down and when you get up." This constant sharing of truth helped make sure future generations wouldn't fall into the same errors as their parents. In his second major address, Moses turned to renewing the covenant with the new generation that would soon cross into the Promised Land. Deuteronomy 29:1 begins with, "These are the terms of the covenant that the Lord instructed Moses to make with the people of Israel in Moab, in addition to the covenant he made with them at Horeb." Renewing the covenant was crucial at this point in Israel's story. The original generation who had witnessed the Exodus and received the law at Sinai had died. Their children now needed to personally agree to the covenant themselves. Moses underlined that this was not a partial agreement, but a full commitment. A major part of this renewal was the detailed listing of both blessings for following God, Deuteronomy 28:1-14, and the consequences of turning away from him, Deuteronomy 28:15-68. The list of punishments was much longer and even included a prophecy that the people would one day be exiled far from home. "The Lord will scatter you among nations from one side of the earth to the other," Deuteronomy 28:64. Still, even in the face of such strong warnings, Moses gave them hope. In Deuteronomy 30, he shared a promise that after these hardships, if the people returned to God, he would bring them back. When these events happen and you come back to the Lord, he will have mercy and gather you from wherever you were scattered. See Deuteronomy 31:3. This promise of return after exile became a powerful source of hope in future times of despair. At the end of this message, Moses put a clear choice in front of the people. He declared, "Today I call heaven and earth as witnesses. I've set before you life or death, blessing or curse, so choose life." Deuteronomy 30:19. The covenant came with conditions, and the people's future depended on their present decisions. To encourage them further, Moses reminded them that obeying God wasn't something beyond reach. This command isn't hidden or out of reach. The word is close, right in your mouth and heart. Deuteronomy 30:11-14. God's law wasn't mysterious or impossible. It just needed a willing heart. To help the people remember these truths, Moses wrote a song recorded in Deuteronomy 32. This song was meant to be memorized and repeated, serving as a witness against the nation when they later abandoned God. See Deuteronomy 31:19. It warned of future unfaithfulness, but also preserved God's justice for coming generations. Moses' final public act was to bless the tribes, as described in Deuteronomy 33. Deuteronomy 33:1 introduces it this way. "This is the blessing Moses, the man of God, gave the Israelites before he died." Unlike Jacob's blessings, which included criticism, Moses' words were all positive, encouraging each tribe and highlighting their strengths. He began by praising God's greatness and ended with a powerful statement of Israel's special identity. "How blessed are you, Israel? Who else is like you, a people saved by the Lord, your protector and defender?" Just Deuteronomy 33:29. After giving these blessings, Moses climbed Mount Nebo, following God's instruction. According to Deuteronomy 34:1, Moses went up to the peak of Pisgah, and the Lord showed him all the land. Then God said, "This is the land I promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I've let you see it with your eyes, but you won't enter it." Even though Moses wasn't allowed to enter the Promised Land, being able to see it before his death was a great act of kindness from God. For Moses, who had longed to bring Israel into Canaan, this moment was deeply meaningful. Deuteronomy 34:5-6 tells us, "Moses, the Lord's servant, died in the land of Moab, and God himself buried him in a valley. To this day, no one knows where his grave is." This unknown burial site may have been meant to prevent people from turning his grave into a shrine, which would have distracted from worshiping God alone, something Moses spent his life teaching. His physical condition at death was extraordinary. Deuteronomy 34:7 says, "Moses was 120 years old when he died, yet his vision was still clear, and he remained strong." This detail implies that his passing wasn't due to aging, but was part of God's greater plan. After his death, the people mourned him. As Deuteronomy 34:8 explains, the Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. This time of mourning helped the nation emotionally shift from one era of leadership to the next. God himself gave Moses a final tribute. No prophet like Moses has ever appeared again in Israel. He knew the Lord face to face and performed incredible signs, displays of power, and awe-inspiring acts before the entire nation. Deuteronomy 34:10 through 12. Moses' unique connection with God became a lasting memory in Israel's story, unmatched until the arrival of another prophet who would be like him, Deuteronomy 18:15. Joshua, the chosen successor, was ready. Deuteronomy 34:9 says, Joshua, son of Nun, was filled with wisdom because Moses had placed his hands on him. The Israelites listened to him. He now carried full authority to lead. With Moses gone, an era had ended. Under his guidance, former slaves had become an organized nation with laws, identity, worship, and a mission from God. Though Moses didn't enter Canaan himself, everything he taught prepared Israel to move forward. The teachings or Torah that he passed on would continue shaping the nation's values and faith. Psalm 90:16-17, often linked to Moses, expresses his hope. Show your works to your servants, and let your glory be seen by their children. May the beauty of the Lord our God rest upon us. Joshua then received his divine commission directly from God. In Joshua 1:6-7, the Lord told him, "Be strong and brave, for you will lead these people to inherit the land I promised to their ancestors. Be strong and very brave. Be sure to follow all the law that Moses, my servant, gave you." This repeated call to courage highlighted that victory would depend not only on battle strategies, but on obedience and faith. Joshua quickly got to work. He told the officers, "Go through the camp and tell everyone, get your supplies ready. In 3 days you will cross the Jordan and take the land the Lord your God is giving you." Joshua 1:11. One of his first smart moves was to send 2 spies into Jericho, their first enemy stronghold. These men took shelter in the house of Rahab, a prostitute who, surprisingly, believed in the power of Israel's God. In Joshua 2:11, Rahab expressed her faith, saying, "When we heard what had happened, we lost all courage because of you. The Lord your God is truly God, above in heaven and below on earth." This confession led to an agreement of protection. The spies promised that she and her family would be safe if she stayed silent about their mission and marked her home with a red cord during the attack. The crossing of the Jordan River, which was overflowing at the time, confirmed Joshua's leadership by mirroring one of Moses' miracles involving water. Joshua 3:15-16 explains that when the priests carrying the ark stepped into the river, the water coming from upstream stopped and piled up far away, while the rest flowed away completely. This incredible moment amazed both the Israelites and the people of Canaan. Joshua 4:14 says, "That day the Lord honored Joshua in front of all Israel, and from then on they respected him as they had respected Moses." To remember this miracle, Joshua told one man from each tribe to take a stone from the dry riverbed and place it in Gilgal. This would serve as a lasting reminder. When your children later ask about it, tell them how the water stopped flowing when the Ark of the Covenant crossed the river, Joshua 4:6-7. At Gilgal, Joshua led the people in renewing their covenant with God. First, he had all the uncircumcised men born during the wilderness years circumcised, since this important sign of the covenant had been neglected. Then they celebrated the Passover. As Joshua 5:10 notes, the Israelites camped at Gilgal and celebrated the Passover on the evening of the 14th day of the month in the plains near Jericho. These acts showed that Israel was entering the Promised Land not just as settlers, but as a people bound by their relationship with God, continuing the commitments begun at the Exodus. As Joshua approached Jericho, he encountered a supernatural figure. Joshua 5:13-14 describes how he saw a man holding a sword. Joshua asked, "Are you on our side or with our enemies?" The man replied, "Neither. I have come as commander of the Lord's army." This being, possibly a divine or angelic presence, then gave Joshua an unusual battle plan. "Have your soldiers march around the city once a day for 6 days. On the 7th day, go around it 7 times. The priests must blow their horns, and when the sound is long, the people should give a loud shout." See Joshua 6:3-5. This surprising method showed that success would come from God's power, not human skill. When they followed these commands exactly, Joshua 6:20 says, "The people shouted, the trumpets sounded, and the walls collapsed. The people rushed in and captured the city. Everything in the city was destroyed, except Rahab and her family, who were kept safe." As Joshua 6:25 explains, Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, her family, and everyone with her because she had protected the spies. She still lives among the Israelites today. Her acceptance into the community hinted at the later inclusion of non-Israelites among God's people. But the next battle against the city of Ai ended in an unexpected defeat for Israel. The reason for Israel's failure was revealed to be disobedience. A man named Ashan had secretly taken items that were supposed to be off-limits from Jericho. As explained in Joshua 7:11-12, the people of Israel had done wrong. They had taken sacred things. They had stolen and hidden the truth. Because of this, they were unable to defeat their enemies. Once the guilty man was found and punished, Joshua carried out a classic battle plan against the city of Ai using a surprise attack. Capture the city, because God will hand it over to you. When you take the city, burn it down. Joshua 8:7-8. This victory brought back the people's trust and showed an important truth. Success required both faithfulness to God and smart planning. The early wins by Israel caused fear among the people of Canaan. While many got ready to fight, the people of Gibeon chose a different path. According to Joshua 9:3-4, when they heard what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they decided to trick him. They sent messengers on donkeys carrying old bags and torn wineskins that had been patched up. By pretending to come from far away, they convinced Israel to make peace. Joshua made an agreement to let them live, and Israel's leaders confirmed it with an oath, Joshua 9:15. This choice was made quickly. The Israelites didn't ask God for guidance, Joshua 9:14. When they realized 3 days later that they had been fooled, they kept the promise out of respect for the oath. However, the Gibeonites were made to serve by cutting wood and carrying water for the community and the altar of God. Joshua 9:27. Honoring this promise, even though it was gained through lies, showed a strong value for keeping one's word that would shape future relationships. The agreement with Gibeon led to a major military reaction. 5 Amorite kings united to attack Gibeon, whose people asked Joshua for help. "Don't leave us. Come quickly and rescue us." Joshua 10:6. Joshua and his men marched all night from Gilgal to Gibeon, surprising the attackers. During this battle, a remarkable event took place. In Joshua 10:12-13, Joshua prayed to God, "Sun, pause over Gibeon, and moon, hold your place over the valley of Ajalon." The sun stopped, and the moon stood still until Israel had won over its enemies. The sun remained in the sky for an entire day. This miraculous lengthening of daylight led to a total victory and showed that God had power over the universe, even over the sun and moon, which were worshipped by others. Later, a larger group of enemies, led by Jabin, king of Hazor, gathered in the north to fight against Israel. Joshua 11:4 describes their forces as being as countless as grains of sand on the shore, with a massive number of horses and war chariots. In the face of this threat, God encouraged Joshua by saying, "Don't be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand them all over to Israel." Struck down. Joshua 11:6. The battle at the waters of Merom led to a major victory and broke the strength of the organized opposition in Canaan, though some areas were still not under Israel's control. Joshua continued to fight these kings for a long period. Joshua 11:18. After many battles, even with parts of the land still unsettled, it was time to divide it among the tribes. Joshua 13:1 states that when Joshua had grown old, God said to him, "You are now elderly, and there is still much land left to be claimed." The land division included both what was already taken and what was yet to be captured, reflecting trust that God's promise of full possession would be fulfilled in time. This distribution happened in Shiloh, where the sacred tent had been set up. As instructed in Joshua 18:6, record the land in 7 parts and bring the reports to me, and I will assign them to the tribes by lot before the Lord our God. These lots were not random, but a way to show that the outcome came from God. Proverbs 16:33 teaches that decisions made by casting lots are guided by the Lord. The land assignments followed both the blessings Jacob had given to his sons and the present needs of the tribes. Before the main distribution, Caleb was given a special piece of land. His request is told in Joshua 14:10-12. "Now just as God promised, he has let me live these 45 years. I am 85 today. Give me the hill country that God said would be mine." You remember that the Anakites lived there then, in cities that were big and strong. But with the Lord's help, I'll drive them out, as he said. Caleb's reward showed his steady trust as he was still ready at 85 to fight the Anakites, giants who had scared the spies decades earlier. After defining the tribal borders, Joshua set up a legal system based on Moses' earlier instructions. 6 safe cities were chosen for anyone who killed someone by accident to run to, so they could be protected from someone seeking revenge. Joshua 23. There were 3 cities on each side of the Jordan, making sure no one would be wrongly punished in a moment of anger. In addition, 48 towns were given to the Levites, spread out across all the tribes. The people of Israel gave these cities and their grazing land to the Levites from their own tribal shares, just as God had ordered. Joshua 21:3. Placing the Levites throughout the country helped make sure that spiritual guidance reached every part of the land. After the land was divided, Joshua allowed the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh to return home across the Jordan, since they had kept their word and helped in the conquest. "You have done everything Moses, the Lord's servant, told you, and you obeyed all my commands too." Joshua 22:2. On their way back, they built a large altar near the Jordan River. This worried the western tribes, who thought it was a sign of turning away from God. They sent leaders to question them. "Why have you committed this sin against the God of Israel by building your own altar and turning from following the Lord?" Joshua 22:16. But the eastern tribes explained the truth. The altar was not for sacrifices, but to stand as a witness between future generations, so your children won't say to ours, "You have no share in the Lord, the God of Israel." Joshua 22:24. The altar, called Ed, meaning witness, was meant to remind everyone of their shared identity, even though they lived apart. As his life neared its end, Joshua called all Israel together. Joshua 23:2-3. "I am old, and you have seen how the Lord your God fought for you against these nations." He reminded them of the dangers of blending with the local people. "You must not mix with the nations that remain or even speak the names of their gods." Joshua 23:7. He reminded them of the covenant's core. God's loyalty requires their loyalty too. Later at Shechem, the place where Abraham once received God's promise, Joshua led a renewal of the covenant. He retold their history from Abraham's father, Terah, to their current victory, showing God's plan across time. This led to a strong appeal in Joshua 24:14-15. Now, respect the Lord and serve him honestly and truly. Decide today who you will serve. But as for me and my family, we will serve the Lord. The people all agreed together. We too will serve the Lord because he is our God. Joshua 24:18. Joshua confirmed this new promise. That day Joshua made a covenant with the people and gave them laws at Shechem. He wrote all of it in God's book. Joshua 24:25-26. A large stone was set up as a witness to their promise. Soon after, Joshua, son of Nun and servant of the Lord, died at 110 years old. Joshua 24:29. He was buried in Timnath-Serah in the hills of Ephraim, marking the close of his leadership. Around that same time, the Israelites buried Joseph's bones, which they had carried from Egypt, in Shechem. Joshua 24:32. This act kept a promise made long ago and showed the completion of the journey from Egypt. The story ends positively. Israel continued to serve the Lord during Joshua's life and while the elders who knew him were still alive. Joshua 24:31. But this faithfulness would not last into the next generation, beginning the difficult era of the judges. After Joshua died and the generation who had seen the conquests passed away, Israel went through a time of disorder. One main cause was that they hadn't fully taken the land. For example, the Canaanites in Gaza were not removed. So the Canaanites continued to live among the people of Ephraim up to that time. Judges 1:29. Similar verses are mentioned about other tribes, showing a broad failure to complete what God had asked. This led to spiritual trouble, described in Judges 2:10-12. That entire generation joined their ancestors in death, and a new one came who didn't know the Lord or what he had done for Israel. The Israelites did what was wrong in God's eyes and worshipped the Baals. They turned away from the Lord, who had brought their ancestors out of Egypt, and followed other gods instead. The biggest danger came from Canaanite religions based on fertility. These included Baal, a god linked to storms and farming, and Asherah, a fertility goddess. These cults promised good crops through rituals, some of which involved sexual acts. For farmers trying to survive, these beliefs seemed helpful. As a result, Israel began to mix their worship of God with these pagan customs. Judges 2:13 says, "They left the Lord and worshipped Baal and Asherah." This didn't always mean they rejected God completely, but rather added other gods alongside him, breaking the first commandment. Politically, Israel had no central rule. Judges 17:6 explains the situation. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did what seemed right to them. The tribes were connected by shared ancestry and faith, but they had no standing government or national army. This lack of leadership made Israel weak, both culturally and militarily. When trouble came, special leaders known as judges would rise for a time to deal with the problem. But these leaders only worked for a short period, and usually just in their own area. The book of Judges follows a repeating pattern, described in Judges 2:11-19. First, the people turned away from God. They did evil in his sight. Then came suffering. God let them fall into enemy hands. Afterward they cried out to him. Then came rescue. God raised up judges to save them. Peace followed, but only for a while. After each judge died, the cycle began again, often with worse behavior than before. This pattern wasn't due to random acts by God, but a direct result of their decisions. When they followed Canaanite ways and lost their unique identity, they became easy targets for enemies. God allowed this as a form of correction. Ironically, success often led to laziness, which restarted the pattern. The book shows 6 major cycles of downfall and rescue, with more stories added. Each time, the people seem to fall deeper into disobedience, with peace becoming shorter and their actions growing more corrupt. This cycle became a model for understanding later events in Israel's story. The books that tell the nation's history often judge its rulers and times based on how loyal they were to God's agreement. Times of trouble are shown as the result of turning away, while peace and success are tied to faithfulness. Even though this pattern seems discouraging, a clear message comes through. God stays true even when people do not. As God says in Judges 2:1, "I will never break the promise I made to you." Even during the worst times, God never fully left his people. He still acted when they turned back to him, showing both fairness and mercy. The book of Judges tells about 12 leaders, but focuses in detail on 6. The first was Othniel, who set the example. When the Israelites cried out to God, he chose Othniel to save them. God's Spirit came on him, and he led Israel into battle. Judges 3:9-10. Under his command, they defeated Cushan-Rishathaim of Mesopotamia and had peace for 40 years. The next judge, Ehud, used a clever plan against Eglon, king of Moab, who had ruled over Israel for 18 years. Ehud was left-handed, which was rare and made him an unexpected threat. He used this to his advantage to get close and kill the king. Ehud reached with his left hand, pulled out a sword from his right side, and stabbed it into the king's belly. Judges 3:21. This daring move gave Israel the courage to defeat Moab, bringing 80 years of rest. Deborah was the only woman among the judges. She led Israel in the fight against Jabin of Hazor and his commander Sisera. Deborah had the power to judge and guide the people. She sat under a palm tree where the Israelites came to settle their disagreements. Judges 4-5. With Barak, she called together an army to fight Sisera's 900 iron chariots. God helped them win, and another woman played a key role. Sisera ran from the battle and hid in the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber. While he was sleeping, she took a tent peg and hammer, approached him quietly, and drove the peg through his head into the ground. Judges 4:21. Gideon was called by God while he was secretly threshing wheat in a winepress to avoid being seen by the Midianites. At first, he doubted himself. He said, "How can I rescue Israel? My family is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least important in my house." Judges 6:15. But after God confirmed his call through signs, Gideon led Israel's army. Strangely, God told him to shrink his force from 32,000 to just 300 soldiers, so that Israel would not say, "We saved ourselves." Judges 7:2. With this small group using surprise tactics, torches hidden in jars, suddenly revealed with trumpet blasts, they frightened and defeated the Midianites, leading to 40 years of peace. Sadly, Gideon later made an idol that became a trap for him and his family. Judges 8:27. This shows how even strong leaders could fall into religious mistakes after doing great things. Jephthah became a leader despite a difficult past. He was the son of a prostitute and rejected by his brothers. But when the Ammonites threatened Israel, the elders of Gilead asked Jephthah to help because he was known for being a warrior. His time as leader is remembered for a careless promise. He said, "If you give me victory over the Ammonites, I will sacrifice whatever comes out of my house to greet me." Judges 11:30-31. After winning the battle, his only daughter came out first, and the result was a heartbreaking loss. This moment shows how dangerous it is to make reckless vows without fully understanding what God wants. The final main judge, Samson, reflects the inner conflict of the time. Set apart for God before birth as a Nazirite, he had great strength but also many flaws. His life was filled with signs of God's power, but also with poor choices, especially his desire for Philistine women, which went against God's law. After many personal fights with the Philistines, driven by revenge, not national duty, Samson was finally caught. Delilah found out the secret of his strength, and his enemies took him, blinded him, and made fun of him. But in the end, he fulfilled his mission by giving up his life. In that moment, he killed more Philistines than during his entire life. Judges 16:30. These leaders show a clear theme. God saved his people through flawed individuals. Their weakness made it clear that victory came from God, not from human strength. The last chapters of Judges 17 to 21 include shocking stories that show how far Israel had fallen in morals and faith. These chapters are not in time order, but act like a conclusion, showing what happens when religion and society fall apart. One story tells of Micah, a man from the hill country of Ephraim who created his own shrine at home. He made an ephod, some silver idols, and made his son a priest. Judges 17:5. Later, he hired a Levite to be his personal priest, mixing the worship of God with idol making. This private and mixed religion broke the proper way of worship set by the law. The story gives no judgment, showing how normal this had become. Things got worse when warriors from the tribe of Dan came looking for land. They stole Micah's idols and took his priest. The Danites took everything Micah had made, along with the priest, and went to Laish. Judges 18:26-27. There they set up their own place of idol worship, which lasted for many generations. The second story tells of a shocking crime in the town of Gibeah, in the land of Benjamin. A Levite traveling with his concubine stopped there for the night. Men from the town surrounded the house and demanded to abuse him. To protect himself, he gave them his concubine. She was mistreated so badly that she died. The next day, the Levite cut her body into 12 parts and sent one to each tribe. Everyone who saw it said, "Nothing like this has ever happened since the Israelites came out of Egypt." Judges 19:30. This horrible act led to a civil war because the tribe of Benjamin refused to turn over those responsible. The other tribes attacked and nearly wiped out Benjamin, leaving only 600 men alive. Later, they regretted the near destruction of an entire tribe and came up with controversial plans to find wives for the survivors. This included kidnapping young women during a festival in Shiloh. These final stories show how far Israel had fallen without strong leadership or loyalty to God's covenant. They had become just as corrupt, or even worse, than the Canaanites they were meant to replace. A line repeated in these chapters says, "At that time, Israel had no king," which suggests that having a king, though not God's original plan, became necessary because of growing disorder and moral failure. The shift from judges to kings began with Samuel, who acted as a prophet, priest, and judge. His story starts with a heartfelt prayer from his mother, Hannah, who promised to give her son to God if she could have one. "I will give him to the Lord for all his life." 1 Samuel 1:11. When Samuel was born, she brought him to the tabernacle at Shiloh after he was weaned. There he grew up with Eli, the high priest. Unlike Samuel, Eli's sons were corrupt. 1 Samuel 2:12 says, "Eli's sons were wicked and did not know the Lord." Their actions reflected how spiritually lost Israel had become. God first spoke to Samuel as a child. 1 Samuel 3:1 notes, "Back then, messages from God were rare and visions were not common." This showed how distant the people had become from God. One night, God called out to Samuel, but he thought it was Eli speaking. Only after several times did Eli realize that it was God's voice. Samuel's first message from God was a warning against Eli's family. God said, "I will carry out everything I have promised about Eli's house." 1 Samuel 3:12. This prophecy marked Samuel as a true prophet. As it says in 1 Samuel 3:20, all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was chosen as a prophet of the Lord. The prophecy came true when the Israelites were defeated by the Philistines. The ark of God was taken, and Eli's sons died in the battle. When Eli heard the news, he fell backward, broke his neck, and died. This national disaster marked the end of priestly leadership based in Shiloh and paved the way for Samuel's broader ministry. After 7 months of suffering among the Philistines who had taken the ark, they decided to return it to Israel. Samuel used this moment to call the people back to God. He said to all of Israel, "If you truly want to come back to the Lord, then get rid of the foreign gods and Ashtoreths among you. Commit yourselves to serve only the Lord." 1 Samuel 7:3. The people listened, removed their idols, and gathered at Mizpah to confess their sins in public. While they were gathered, the Philistines launched an attack, but God stepped in. The Lord sent a loud thunder that day against the Philistines, throwing them into confusion, and Israel defeated them. 1 Samuel 7:10. To remember this victory, Samuel placed a stone and named it Ebenezer, meaning stone of help. He said, "The Lord has helped us this far." 1 Samuel 7:12. Under Samuel's leadership, lost cities were recovered, and peace was made with the Amorites. Samuel continued judging Israel for many years. He traveled each year between Bethel, Gilgal, and Mizpah, but lived in Ramah. As he grew older, he appointed his sons as judges, but they did not follow his example. They were corrupt. They chased after money, accepted bribes, and twisted justice. 1 Samuel 8:3. This failure opened the door to political change. Israel's elders came to Samuel and said, "You are old, and your sons do not follow your ways. Give us a king to lead us like the other nations have." 1 Samuel 8:5. Samuel was upset, but God told him to listen to the people while warning them about what a king would do. "A king will take your sons, he will take your daughters, he will take a portion of your crops, and you will become his servants." 1 Samuel 8:11-17. Even after this, the people insisted, "We still want a king, so we can be like the other nations." 1 Samuel 8:19-20. Their request showed a deeper desire to blend in with the cultures around them. Exactly the issue that had led to their troubles during the time of the judges. Though saddened, Samuel agreed to anoint a king, following God's instructions. This marked the end of the era of judges. The monarchy was a new form of leadership, but the core problems, idol worship and resisting God's rule, would continue, only in different forms. The time of the judges, with its repeated mistakes and short-term victories, showed that Israel needed more than just temporary leaders. Later prophets would often look back to these stories to warn against turning away from God and to remind the people that even during times of great failure, God remained faithful. The Judges era left behind a lasting message about the tension between Israel's call to be holy and its constant temptation to follow the world around it. The move toward monarchy didn't begin with God's plan. It came from the people. 1 Samuel 8:5-21. They said, "Appoint a king for us so we can be like other nations." At its core, this request revealed a desire to copy nearby nations and a rejection of God's direct rule. Samuel was deeply troubled, but God told him, "Listen to what the people are asking. They're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me as their king." 1 Samuel 8:7. Samuel warned about what a king would bring: mandatory military service, forced labor, heavy taxes, and the loss of personal freedom. Still, the people refused to change their minds. God told Samuel to choose a young man from the tribe of Benjamin named Saul. 1 Samuel 9:2 describes him as very handsome. No one in Israel was better looking, and he was taller than everyone else. Samuel privately poured oil on Saul's head and said, "Hasn't the Lord chosen you to rule over his people?" 1 Samuel 10:1. Later, signs confirmed this, and the people publicly accepted him through the casting of sacred lots at Mizpah. Saul's leadership began well. When messengers arrived from Jabesh Gilead, warning of an Ammonite threat, God's Spirit filled Saul, and he called all of Israel to arms. 1 Samuel 11:6-7. They won the battle, and Saul's rule was firmly established. Some even asked, "Who said Saul shouldn't be king? Bring them here and let us kill them." 1 Samuel 11:12. but Saul's character soon began to show weaknesses. At Gilgal, nervous about Samuel's delay, Saul took it upon himself to offer the burnt offering, which was not his role. 1 Samuel 13:9. Samuel told him that was foolish. God would have made your kingdom last, but now it will not. 1 Samuel 13:13-14. Saul's failure became even clearer after the victory over the Amalekites. God had ordered complete destruction, but Saul kept the king alive and saved the best animals. 1 Samuel 15:9. When Samuel questioned him, Saul blamed the people. I was afraid of them, so I listened to them. 1 Samuel 15:24. His lack of bold leadership led to God's final decision. You have turned away from God's word, so he has turned away from you as king. 1 Samuel 15:23. In secret, Samuel anointed a new leader, David, a young shepherd from Bethlehem. God said in 1 Samuel 16:7, people focus on looks, but the Lord sees the heart. Meanwhile, Saul suffered from an evil spirit. David was brought into the royal court to calm him with music, putting the future king in the service of the rejected one. David became famous after defeating Goliath. He said in 1 Samuel 17:45-47, you come at me with sword, spear, and javelin, but I come at you in the name of the Lord of armies. Everyone will see that there is a God in Israel. Saul became jealous after David's success, especially when women sang songs praising David for defeating more enemies than Saul. At the same time, David and Saul's son Jonathan formed a strong bond. Their souls were closely connected, and Jonathan cared for David like he cared for himself. As Saul's attempts to kill David increased, David had to run away, beginning years of being hunted. During this time, David had 2 chances to harm Saul, but chose not to, out of respect for the one God had chosen. He said he couldn't bring himself to attack someone appointed by God. Eventually, Saul and Jonathan died in battle against the Philistines on Mount Gilboa. David was heartbroken and cried out about the tragic loss. He especially mourned Jonathan's death on the hills where he fell. Afterward, David was made king, but only over the tribe of Judah in the city of Hebron. For 7 years he ruled Judah, while Saul's son Ishbosheth ruled the northern tribes under the guidance of Abner. The nation was divided in civil war until both Abner and Ishbosheth were killed. That opened the way for unity. Then the leaders of all the tribes of Israel came to David in Hebron and said they shared the same roots with him. After conquering Jerusalem from the Jebusites, David chose it as the new capital. It was wisely placed between the north and south and hadn't belonged to any one tribe before. David also brought the sacred ark to Jerusalem, making it the center of worship. The ark was placed in a tent David had set up especially for it. When David planned to build a permanent house for God, he was given a greater promise through the prophet Nathan. Nathan told David that after his time was over, one of his descendants would rule and that kingdom would never end. This promise became a key part of the hope for a future savior. As king, David won many battles and expanded Israel's territory, defeating enemies like the Philistines, Moabites, Syrians, Edomites, and Ammonites. He also created a well-organized government with officials such as record keepers, priests, and military leaders. But David made a serious mistake with Bathsheba, another man's wife. He called for her, slept with her, and got her pregnant. Trying to hide his actions, David arranged for Bathsheba's husband Uriah to be put on the front lines of a deadly battle, then abandoned so he would be killed. God sent Nathan to confront David with a story about a rich man stealing a poor man's only lamb. When David reacted angrily, Nathan told him he was that man. David admitted his wrongdoing and said he had sinned against God. He was forgiven, but the results of his actions brought lasting pain. The child born from sin died, and David's later life was filled with pain. His family suffered greatly. His son Amnon assaulted his half-sister Tamar. Then Amnon was killed by his brother Absalom. Absalom later turned against David and was killed as well. Even with all this sorrow, David held the kingdom together, made sure Solomon would be the next king, and prepared the way for Israel's most prosperous era. Solomon's rise to power was filled with tension. As David neared death, Adonijah, his oldest living son, claimed the throne, saying, "I will be the king." 1 Kings 1:5. But with help from the prophet Nathan and Solomon's mother Bathsheba, Solomon was crowned, keeping David's promise. Early in his rule, Solomon received a rare offer from God. "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." 1 Kings 3:5. Solomon asked with humility, "Please give me a wise heart to lead your people and to know right from wrong." 1 Kings 3:9. God was pleased and gave him unmatched wisdom, plus great riches and honor. His wisdom became legendary through a case where two women claimed the same baby. Solomon suggested cutting the child in two to see who the real mother was. The true mother gave up her claim to save her child's life. This revealed who she was. Everyone in Israel heard of the king's decision and respected him deeply because they saw he had God-given wisdom to rule fairly. 1 Kings 3:28. Solomon improved the government by dividing the land into 12 regions to supply the royal household. He also boosted trade and made a deal with Hiram of Tyre to get supplies for building the temple. Solomon's biggest achievement was the temple in Jerusalem. According to 1 Kings 6:1, he began building it in the 4th year of his reign, 480 years after the Israelites left Egypt. The project took 7 years and resulted in a stunning temple filled with holy objects like a new altar, lampstand, and bread table. When the temple was dedicated, God's presence filled the building, 1 Kings 8:11. Solomon gave a powerful prayer, admitting that no building could hold God. "Even the skies can't contain you, how much less this house I've built." 1 Kings 8:27. Still, he asked God to listen to all prayers made toward it, from both Israelites and foreigners. Solomon's rule brought unmatched wealth to Israel. In 1 Kings 10:27, it says silver became as common as stones in Jerusalem. His fame drew visitors from far away, including the Queen of Sheba, who said, "I wasn't told the half of it. Your wisdom and success are beyond anything I heard." 1 Kings 10:7. But his riches also led to spiritual problems. Solomon married 700 wives and had 300 concubines, many from political deals. As Solomon grew older, his many wives led him away from worshipping the one true God. His devotion weakened, and he started building places of worship for other gods, including Chemosh of Moab and Molech of the Ammonites, 1 Kings 11:4. Because of this betrayal, God pronounced judgment. "Since you have turned away from me and broken my agreement, I will take the kingdom from you and give it to someone under your authority. But I won't do this while you are alive. It will happen during your son's reign." 1 Kings 11:11-12. This set in motion the future split of the kingdom. When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam immediately faced a major challenge. The tribes in the north demanded that he ease their burdens. "Your father made life hard for us. Please lighten the heavy workload and the pressure he put on us." 1 Kings 12:4. Instead of listening to older, wiser advisors, Rehoboam followed the advice of his young peers and responded harshly, "My father punished you with whips, but I will punish you with scorpions." 1 Kings 12:14. This response caused an open rebellion. The people said, "We have no part in David. Why should we follow Jesse's son? Everyone go home. David, take care of your own house." 1 Kings 12:16. Jeroboam, who had been told by a prophet that he would be king, came back from Egypt and led 10 tribes to form a new kingdom, Israel. Rehoboam was left with just the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, forming the kingdom of Judah. Soon after, religious separation followed political division. Jeroboam made new worship centers in Dan in the north and Bethel near the south border. He told the people, "You don't need to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods who brought you out of Egypt." 1 Kings 12:28. He placed golden calves at these sites. Although meant to represent the Lord, they broke the second commandment and rivaled worship in Jerusalem. Jeroboam also created his own group of priests, not from the Levite tribe, and started his own festival on the 15th day of the 8th month, a date he chose himself, 1 Kings 12:33. These actions began a long tradition of false worship in the northern kingdom. Because of this spiritual decline, God strengthened the role of prophets. Earlier prophets usually gave advice to kings. Now new prophets began working alone, challenging authority and calling out the nation's sins. Elijah was one of these powerful voices. During King Ahab's rule, a king who married Jezebel and started serving Baal, 1 Kings 16:31, Elijah stood up and declared, "As the Lord God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be no rain or dew for years unless I say so." 1 Kings 17:1. After 3 years of drought, Elijah arranged a dramatic contest on Mount Carmel between himself and 450 prophets of Baal. He asked the people, "How long will you sit on the fence? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him." 1 Kings 18:21. When Baal did nothing, but God sent fire from heaven to consume Elijah's offering, the people shouted, "The Lord is God! The Lord is God!" After Elijah's powerful showdown, Elisha took over as prophet and continued proving God's power through miracles. He healed a polluted spring in Jericho, made oil last endlessly for a poor widow, and even brought a young boy, the Shunammite's son, back to life. In the southern kingdom, prophets like Isaiah worked closely with kings. They gave both harsh truths and words of comfort. During a time when the Assyrians were a major threat, Isaiah told King Hezekiah not to fear the enemy's words. He will go back the same way he came, 2 Kings 19:32-33. God made this come true when the Assyrian forces were wiped out unexpectedly. But prophets didn't only speak of destruction, they also gave promises of a better future. Through them, God shared hope, saying he would renew his covenant. "I will place my law within them and write it on their hearts." Jeremiah 31:33. They also spoke of a future ruler from David's line who would lead with justice. "I will give David a righteous descendant, a wise king." Jeremiah 23:5. As both kingdoms moved closer to disaster, the voices of the prophets became even more vital. They preserved God's message through exile and laid the groundwork for Israel's restoration. Meanwhile, the northern kingdom suffered from constant leadership changes. Unlike Judah, which kept David's family as rulers, Israel had 9 ruling families and 19 kings over about 2 centuries. 2 Kings 15 shows just how unstable things became, describing 4 kings who followed one another quickly. One of them, Shalom, ruled for only a month before being killed. Every king in the north receives the same judgment. He did what displeased the Lord. He continued in the wrong ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who led Israel into sin. 2 Kings 13:11. Jeroboam's decision to build alternate worship sites became the core of the kingdom's broken spiritual path. Things reached new lows under King Ahab. He is described as being worse than all the kings before him. 1 Kings 16:30. His wife Jezebel from Sidon influenced him to make Baal worship official and go after the prophets of God. During this time, Elijah made a powerful statement. "I am the only prophet of the Lord left, but Baal has 450 prophets." 1 Kings 18:22. Jehu later led a movement to erase Baal worship, and he wiped Baal out of Israel. 2 Kings 10:28. But even he left the golden calves standing in Dan and Bethel. No reform was deep enough to truly change the direction of the kingdom. Prophets kept warning of the nation's downfall. Amos said, "The time is coming when I will send a famine, not of food or water, but of hearing the Lord's words." Amos 8:11. Hosea painted a vivid picture of Israel's unfaithfulness by comparing it to a woman chasing after lovers she will never catch. Then she will say, "I'll return to my first husband. It was better for me then than it is now." Hosea 2:7. The fall of the northern kingdom happened step by step. In the time of King Pekah, the Assyrians began their attacks. Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian king, captured towns like Ijon and regions such as Galilee and Naphtali. He then took many people and forced them to live in Assyria, 2 Kings 15:29. The final blow came during the reign of King Hoshea, Israel's last ruler. According to 2 Kings 17:3-6, Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, came against him. He invaded the land, laid siege to Samaria, and after 3 years, captured it. In Hoshea's 9th year, Israel's capital was taken and its people were exiled to Assyria. The Bible is very clear about the cause of this tragedy. It happened because Israel sinned against God, copied the customs of other nations, and secretly did things that opposed him. 2 Kings 17:7-9. After the conquest, the Assyrians moved new people into the land. They brought settlers from Babylon and placed them in Samaria's towns. 2 Kings 17:24. This created a mixed group of people who practiced a blend of beliefs. They feared the Lord, but also followed their own gods. 2 Kings 17:33. Over time, their descendants became known as the Samaritans, a group still present in New Testament times. Judah, which stayed under David's royal line, remained more stable and lasted about 135 years after the fall of Samaria. While every northern king is condemned in Scripture, some of Judah's kings are praised. He did what was right in God's eyes. 2 Kings 18:3. Times of revival would come and go. King Asa took bold steps. He removed shrine prostitutes and destroyed all the idols his ancestors had made. 1 Kings 15:12. His son Jehoshaphat continued this work by sending leaders to towns across Judah to teach the people. They carried with them the book of God's law. 2 Chronicles 17:8-9. Hezekiah brought major reforms. He got rid of high places, destroyed sacred pillars, cut down the Asherah pole, and even smashed the bronze snake Moses had made, which people had started burning incense to. 2 Kings 18:4. Under his rule, Judah survived a terrifying attack by the Assyrians when an angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 soldiers in their camp. 2 Kings 19:35. But then came Hezekiah's son, Manasseh, who led the kingdom into deep darkness. He rebuilt the high places, made altars for Baal, set up an Asherah pole, and worshipped the stars. He even burned his own son as a sacrifice, used magic, looked for omens, and consulted fortune-tellers and mediums. As 2 Kings 21:16 explains, Manasseh's reign brought terrible violence. He spilled so much innocent blood that it filled Jerusalem from one side to the other. Although he later turned back to God after being briefly taken prisoner to Babylon, the spiritual damage he caused was deep and lasting. According to 2 Kings 23:26, still, the Lord did not hold back his fierce anger because of all the ways Manasseh had provoked him. Manasseh's grandson, Josiah, led one final push for change. This began when workers found the book of the law during repairs to the temple. After hearing it read aloud, Josiah made a solemn promise before God to follow him and obey his laws, teachings, and instructions. 2 Kings 23:3. He cleaned out the temple, destroyed pagan worship sites, removed false priests, and brought back the Passover celebration. But even with these efforts, Judah was heading in the same direction as Israel. The prophet Jeremiah mourned over this, saying, "Look, you're putting your trust in lies that won't help you. You steal, kill, commit adultery, and then come into this house that bears my name and say, 'We're safe now.'" Jeremiah 7:8-10. The warning was clear. Judgment was on the way. Jeremiah declared, "This whole land will become a ruined wasteland, and the people will serve the king of Babylon for 70 years. Jeremiah 25:11. Everything changed when the Neo-Babylonian Empire rose to power under King Nebuchadnezzar. In 605 BC, after defeating the Egyptians at Carchemish, the Babylonians took over the lands once ruled by Assyria. Daniel 1:1-3 tells of the first deportation. In the third year of King Jehoiakim's reign, Nebuchadnezzar came to Jerusalem and laid siege to it. He ordered Ashpenaz, the chief official, to bring young men from royal and noble families of Israel to Babylon. Among them were Daniel and his 3 companions. Then in 597 BC, after Jehoiakim rebelled, Babylon responded with a much larger deportation. As 2 Kings 24:12-14 reports, Jehoiakim surrendered to Nebuchadnezzar, who seized everything of value from the temple and the royal palace. He exiled all of Jerusalem's leaders and soldiers, 10,000 people in total. One of them was the prophet Ezekiel, who would later receive visions from God in Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar placed Zedekiah, Jehoiakim's uncle, on the throne as a puppet king. But Zedekiah ignored Jeremiah's advice and eventually rebelled against Babylon, 2 Kings 24:20. This brought about Jerusalem's final destruction. 2 Kings 25:1-2 describes what happened next. Nebuchadnezzar and his army returned and surrounded the city. The siege lasted until the 11th year of Zedekiah's rule. With famine devastating the people, the city finally surrendered. Zedekiah tried to escape but was caught. His punishment was brutal. As 2 Kings 25:7 recounts, his sons were killed right in front of him. Then his eyes were put out, and he was taken to Babylon in chains. Jerusalem and its temple were completely destroyed. The Babylonians burned the temple, the royal palace, and every important house in the city. They tore down Jerusalem's walls, leaving it exposed and defenseless. 2 Kings 25:9-10. A third wave of exiles was taken away, removing nearly everyone who remained. Only the poorest were left behind to work the vineyards and fields. 2 Kings 25:12. Jeremiah, who had stayed in the city, was released by the Babylonians. But after the local governor Gedaliah was killed, the remaining Judeans fled to Egypt, dragging Jeremiah with them, even though he didn't want to go. Lamentations 1:1 expresses deep sorrow. How empty sits the city that once overflowed with people. She was once honored among the nations, now she sits alone like a widow. Meanwhile, in Babylon, the exiles began building new communities. Without the temple or political freedom, they found new ways to hold on to their faith. Psalm 137 captures their pain. We sat by the rivers of Babylon and wept as we remembered Zion. How can we sing songs of the Lord in a strange land? This national catastrophe led to serious soul-searching. Why would God allow his holy temple to fall and his people to be defeated? The prophets gave a clear answer. Exile came because the people broke their agreement with God. Jeremiah explained, "They abandoned my teachings and followed their own stubborn hearts. That's why I scattered them among other nations." Jeremiah 9:13-16. Ezekiel added that everyone would be held personally accountable. The person who sins is the one who will die. Ezekiel 18:4. But exile didn't mean God had given up on his people. It was discipline, not rejection. Isaiah gave hope. I turned away from you for a short time, but with deep love I will bring you back. Isaiah 54:7. Jeremiah even gave a timeline. After 70 years in Babylon, I will come for you and keep my promise to bring you home. Jeremiah 29:10. During this time, new spiritual habits formed to help preserve identity without the temple. Practices like circumcision, keeping the Sabbath, and following dietary laws became key signs of their faith. The synagogue also emerged as a place for reading the scriptures and praying together. Ezra would later represent this new focus, known as a teacher well-versed in the law of Moses. Ezra 7:6. The exile also reshaped how people understood pain and loss. A new idea arose, that suffering might have meaning beyond punishment. Isaiah spoke of a servant whose pain would bring healing. He was wounded for our wrongdoing and crushed because of our sins. His suffering brought us peace, and his wounds made us whole. Isaiah 53:5. The prophets also gave visions of a future far better than the past. Ezekiel saw a new temple with a river flowing from it, bringing life and renewal wherever it went. Ezekiel described a vision of a temple with life-giving waters flowing from it. Ezekiel 47. Jeremiah spoke of a new covenant, one not written on stone, but engraved on the hearts of people. Jeremiah 31:31-34. These promises gave hope and strength to the community throughout the long years of foreign rule. One of the most powerful results of exile was the lasting rejection of idol worship. Before being taken captive, Israel constantly fell into the trap of following other gods. But after returning from Babylon, though they still struggled in other spiritual areas, they never again turned to idols in the same way. The trauma of exile seemed to have erased that desire once and for all. The impact of exile deeply shaped the Jewish faith that followed. The people came back to their homeland under the leadership of Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah. They rebuilt the temple and restored the walls of Jerusalem. Yet full independence never returned, not until modern times. Instead, they lived under a series of empires, Persian, then Greek, and finally Roman. Still, through all those centuries, they kept their faith alive. The memory of exile served as a constant reminder of the cost of breaking their covenant with God. In the time between the Old and New Testaments, groups like the Pharisees and Essenes emerged, each trying to understand the exile's lessons and apply them to their own time. Meanwhile, hope for a Messiah grew stronger. Many looked to Daniel's visions of rising and falling world powers and waited for the Son of Man, who would bring an everlasting kingdom. So when John the Baptist came preaching, "Turn back to God, the kingdom of heaven is close," his words echoed deep, ancient hopes born during exile. What seemed like the end was actually a turning point in God's greater plan. Israel's story didn't end in ruin. It was reshaped through judgment and kept alive by God's faithful mercy, ready for the next chapter of redemption. This brings us to the close of this powerful journey through the Old Testament, from the dawn of creation to the exile in Babylon. As we've seen, this isn't just a collection of old stories. It's a living account of the relationship between God and people, filled with triumphs and failures, promises and corrections, sorrow and restoration. Through it all, one truth stands out. Even when humanity stumbles, God's mercy never gives up. Whether in the garden, on the ark, at Mount Sinai, in the promised land in Jerusalem, or beside Babylon's rivers, we see the same loving God working to restore what was broken. If this message has inspired you or helped you understand the Bible more deeply, we invite you to join us in spreading it further. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more content designed to grow your faith and deepen your grasp of Scripture. Share this video with friends, family, and on your social platforms, because everyone should have the chance to engage with God's Word. Just as generations of Israelites preserved these stories through exile and hardship, we too are called to carry this legacy forward. By subscribing and sharing, you become part of a living chain of faith that reaches across the ages. Until next time, may the wisdom found in Scripture guide your steps and strengthen your walk with God.